1. Visitors to Azkaban. The grim fortress of Azkaban crouched on a lonely cliff in the North Sea. Waves smashed against the rocks, and dementors wheeled and drifted above the prison like living storms. In one of its stone cells, Sagres Greengrass sat on the narrow bed, a slender wand in his hand whose tip burned with a faint silver light. He watched nothing in particular, unaffected by the prisoner's howls or the far-off wails of the dementors. A tattered magic book hovered beside him, its pages turning by an unseen force as dense runes and formulas rearranged themselves. The cell door opened. Sagres did not lower his wand. "How surprising," he said without looking up. "Since when does Azkaban allow visitors?" "For an old man like me, privileges come and go," Albus Dumbledore replied as he stepped inside. His eyes were bright behind his half-moon spectacles. His robes caught the dim light and seemed almost out of place in the bleak room. He set a small bag of lemon sherbets on the stone table. Sargeras's fingers twitched. The floating book turned to ash and drifted down. He looked at the old wizard, calm and measured. "Azkaban has many empty rooms, Headmaster." Dumbledore blinked, amusement in the lines around his eyes. "And yet they didn't take your wand." He held up his own. Sagres had previously traced Dumbledore's wand, an act no ordinary wizard could forget, and now he let it rest in his hand with a relaxed pride. Even a Dementor cannot sense its aura. Dumbledore glanced at the walls. The anti-magic stones were covered in tiny inscriptions, magical formulas scratched and overlaid in a dense lattice. He leaned closer to read. "Energy conversion in emotional magic and the symbiotic relationship with Dementors," he murmured. "It seems you haven't abandoned your research, even here. Perhaps this place isn't keeping you as contained as they hoped." He plucked a fizzing Whizbee from his pocket and popped it into his mouth. "Just passing the time." Sagres flicked his wand and erased the runes. "Expelling you from Hogwarts 5 years ago might have been the biggest mistake I ever made," Dumbledore said quietly. That made Sagres frown. "Professor Dumbledore, if you've come to mock my circumstances, you may leave. Studying those tiresome dementors is punishment enough without a self-righteous visitor." Dumbledore gave a soft, helpless sigh. "I never meant to mock you, Sagres. I expelled you because your research walked a dangerous line. I had to think of the students." "Dangerous," Sagres shook his head. "Magic is dangerous by nature." He tapped the stone bed with his wand, and a simple oak chair appeared. "I understood your decision then. I bear you no grudge." Dumbledore smiled as he sat. The chair creaked under him. "I am glad to hear that, especially since you haven't written to me once in the 5 years since you left." "You heard of me from Phileas," Dumbledore said, a faint shine on his spectacles. "I know you never stopped seeking the deeper truths of magic, and you've achieved remarkable results. Frankly, I approve." Sagres raised a hand to cut him off. "If you came to the point, say it. I have had enough praise." "Of course." Dumbledore produced a sealed letter from his robes. "Judging by what you've done, you deserve a better environment for your work. Hogwarts needs a charms consultant, someone to guide senior students' theoretical research and oversee practical spell work, someone to teach those who have passed their OWLs." Sagres took the letter, but did not break the seal. His fingertips brushed the Hogwarts crest. "Return to Hogwarts?" he said softly. Memories slid through him, Hogwarts as it had been, a time that had felt peaceful and beautiful. Dumbledore waited. After a long pause, Sagres composed himself. "I can accept, but you will have to use your influence on the Wizengamot to get me out of here legally." "I will see to it," Dumbledore promised. "The Ministry will issue your pardon first thing tomorrow. Also, if I'm to return, then Thursday afternoons, tea in the headmaster's office," Sagres interrupted, allowing himself a brief smirk. "And when the castle calls, I'll protect it by my own means." Silence fell, broken only by the distant sound of the sea. Sagres tapped the bag of lemon sherbets, and with a flick of his wand, the candies arranged themselves into a miniature sugar model of Hogwarts. It gleamed in the moonlight. "I can agree to that, Professor Dumbledore," he said, "but I have 2 conditions." "State them." "First, no ethics committees shall interfere with my research." He collapsed the sugar castle into a scatter of sweets and reformed them into a lattice of complex 3-dimensional runes. "Second, when I determine that certain traditional wisdom obstructs the truth, I reserve the right to implement educational reforms. Dumbledore examined the floating runes, ancient Norse sigils of a kind he recognized, and was silent for some time. Finally, he extended his hand. Then Hogwarts welcomes you, Professor Greengrass. Sargeras returned the handshake. Exploring the restricted section of the library will no longer be considered a violation of school rules, he said. Dumbledore couldn't resist a small smile. Just don't replace the index pages in most patenti potions again. Madame Pince still blames herself for that classification error. With a quiet laugh, Dumbledore left in a ripple of phoenix-feathered apparition. As the cell door shut behind him, strange images flickered through Sargeras's mind. Laboratory glassware, unfamiliar and precise, blackboards scrawled with equations and diagrams, experiments extending into the small hours. They weren't part of this world and never stayed long. They were always replaced by memories he could not forget. His family's scorn in his childhood, his mother's screams as the Crucio took her, his father's cold retreating back. When Sargeras first transmigrated, he had been relieved. Most who found themselves in another world arrived as orphans. He had parents and a place in the Greengrass family, one of the 28, pure blood by name. He imagined a comfortable life, study of magic, society dinners, perhaps an amusing dabble in Gringotts markets. But the wizarding world he entered was under Voldemort's shadow until the Dark Lord fell. He knew, in the broadest terms, that Harry Potter would one day defeat Voldemort, but he did not know when or how, and in the meantime, his family were ardent Death Eaters. His father was a silencer at the Ministry, taciturn and remote. His mother was Muggle-born and despised Sargeras's half-blood status with venomous insistence, as if she hoped to drown out her own origins by hating him. That hatred might have been bearable if it had been only her bitterness, but the Greengrass Death Eaters used her as proof of their loyalty, humiliating and torturing her until she went mad, and finally ending her life with a killing curse. Sargeras was 5 when he learned. He did not know whether to feel relief or grief. His mother had given him life, but had also made his every day a torment. After his first uncontrolled outburst of magic, wielded without a wand and without understanding, he had a single thought: this is worse than being an orphan. Threatened by violence, he learned quickly. At 5, he forced a first spell into being, an ability he kept discovering, an aptitude for bending the raw power inside him into new effects. When his magic built up beyond a point, he could improve or even create spells, the golden finger of his power. He devised potent confundo, a spell without offensive force but exquisitely useful. It caused people to overlook him, to simply not notice his presence. He became a living shadow in his own house and survived 6 precarious years like that. When his Hogwarts letter arrived, on the eve of leaving home, he used what he had learned. 2 elder Death Eaters who had cast Crucio on him found themselves shipped to Azkaban. His father was detained after Voldemort's fall, and likely met his end under a Dementor's kiss. A raven beat against the window and alighted. It held in its beak a scrap of a Dementor's cloak. Sargeras took it, ran his wand over the torn fabric until it turned to ash, and a wisp of ethereal blue energy seeped into him. The flame-shaped rune scar on his wrist glowed faintly in the moonlight, a mark from a separate dark arts experiment and the reason he could walk through Azkaban unbowed. He folded his wand away and rose. "Time to leave," he said to the empty cell. The brass number 93 was nailed to a moldy brick wall on Diagon Alley. Passers-by assumed the place was an abandoned warehouse. Sargeras tapped his wand 3 times. The bricks rose and rearranged like piano keys, revealing a spiral staircase that led down to the basement, his temporary lodgings, rented for 2 galleons a week, once the candy cellar of a dessert shop. Cleaning charm. He flicked his wand at oak barrels crusted with frosting. The smell of sour cream and sugar hung in the air as 12 barrels slid together into a desk, and a patch of toffee syrup on the wall flowed into an amber lamp. The Daily Prophet slipped through the crack in the window and fanned open on the desk, its headline screaming, "Order of Merlin recipient cleared, will teach at Hogwarts." The photograph showed his back as he walked out of Azkaban, the hem of his black robe lifted by sea wind. Beneath it lay a copy of the Ministry's pardon. Sargeras folded the paper into a crane and tossed it into the fireplace. The flames licked the words "dangerous genius" and consumed them in an instant. A warm splat landed on the pardon. Without looking up, he said, "You're 2 minutes and 17 seconds late." The soot fell as a battered mechanical raven folded its metallic wings and set a sealed letter on the desk. Loyalties, a cursed creature Sagres had found in the ruins of Durmstrang, held the wax seal in its beak. A shard of obsidian had been grafted into its left eye, bending magic like a prism. It depended on Sagres' power to keep functioning, and in return, it served as his messenger. He took the letter and glanced at it. A quill and a sheet of parchment fluttered from the dragonhide trunk. He scattered a pinch of mithril dust. Loyalties hopped onto his arm, cocked its mechanical head, and gave a high, piercing cry. "Quiet!" The raven pecked at the dust. The quill began to write in smooth, precise strokes. Required reading for Advanced Charms Theory and Practice. 1. Advanced Charm Applications, Miranda Goshawk, 1897 Revised Edition. 2. Introduction to Magic, Ancient Runes Study Group. 3. Cutting-Edge Magical Topology, Sagres Greengrass, photocopied manuscript. The quill hesitated, then added a short postscript. Suggested tools. 1. Mithril-plated slide rule. 2. Double-sided crystal prism. When the last stroke was finished and the inkwell capped, sunlight filtered through the cellar vent, catching the side of his face. He unbuttoned his shirt collar and stepped in front of the changing mirror. The black robe of a Hogwarts professor adjusted itself until the silver-threaded Ravenclaw eagle embroidered on his left breast gleamed, an old privilege of an alumnus. Steam rolled and coal smoke stung at platform 9 3/4. Sagres pushed through a crush of first years and trunks, the hem of his robe brushing a red-haired boy's battered case. A chocolate frog card peeked from one corner. Dumbledore's portrait winked. "Move it! Move it! This rotten trunk is going to fall apart." Ron Weasley's shout went off like a firework. The trunk's springs gave with a dramatic clatter. A scatter of textbooks, magazines, comics, a roll of newspapers, half a bag of every flavor beans, and a limping rat flew past and brushed Sagres' boots. Behind the trunk, a bespectacled boy fussed with tape. "Reparo." Sagres barely moved a finger. The scattered things flew cleanly back into the case, and the brass clasps realigned into a far more stable geometry. Ron gaped. "Red hair? You from the Weasley family?" Sagres asked, noticing the worn wand budded from the boy's pocket, a faint crack in the ash grain, a slightly glowing tip, and the unicorn hair core obviously thinned by use. "Even as a new student," Sagres said, "you should be able to cast the most basic mending charms, especially if you're a Weasley." The two boys were left stunned. Sagres shook his head and moved toward the rear of the train. The whistle cut through their stammered thanks. He slipped into the last compartment and sealed the door with a banishment charm. Ice crystals crawled over the knob, and the enchantment made people unconsciously avoid the carriage. The door opened again anyway. "Has anyone seen a toad?" "Neville's lost a toad," Hermione Granger asked, peering in. Harry and Ron, busy with snacks, shook their heads. A gust blew the Daily Prophet open on the seat. The headline gleamed, "Order of Merlin recipient cleared. Controversial genius returns to Hogwarts." The photo showed him in a black professor's robe, his features carved sternly, Azkaban's iron bars blurred in the morning light behind him. In the paper he looked up. The silver flash in his gray eyes caught the camera and made Harry's hand tremble. A chocolate frog leapt out of its wrapper and fell into Ron's pumpkin juice with a soggy splat. "Merlin's beard. He's the new professor at Hogwarts." Ron pressed his nose to the page. "It says he used magic to blow up 5 wizards." "They were 5 dark wizards," Hermione corrected, shutting the compartment door against the draft. "I've read reports about him. More than one." "What is the Order of Merlin?" Harry seized the chance to ask. Hermione pulled a bit of lint from her sleeve with her wand and said, "The newspapers like to confuse things. The Order of Merlin is one of the highest honors in the wizarding world, awarded by the Wizengamot since the 15th century for a wizard's achievements and contributions." She tapped the paper. "It says that on the very day he was expelled from Hogwarts, he improved several healing spells, Episci, Vulnera Senentur, Renervate, and increased their effectiveness for severe injuries by at least 60%. The press said Headmaster Dumbledore was criticized for expelling him, some claiming Dumbledore was senile." Sounds like a grudge, Ron muttered. My father mentioned it, Hermione went on, but apparently Professor Greengrass didn't attend any later award ceremony. After he was expelled in his 5th year, he went to Durmstrang and finished his studies 2 years later. Then he taught at Ilvermorny for a year, resigned, traveled for a year, and was later recruited by the British ministry. And then he ended up in Azkaban for murder? Ron said, chewing a piece of bubblegum with a worried squeak. It was self-defense! Hermione's curls trembled. Under the Wizards' Rights Protection Act, Aurors can use appropriate defensive measures when faced with danger on duty. She pointed to a line in the report. Witnesses said he used only 1 spell and didn't even chant. 2 pureblood families jointly accused him, she added thoughtfully. Maybe some of those 5 were related to them. So why did Dumbledore expel him back then? Harry asked. Hermione faltered. After a moment she said, I don't know either. 3. Sorting ceremony. The candlelight in the Great Hall flickered as rain beat against the castle windows. As Sagres followed Professor McGonagall into the hall, Peeves hung upside down over the Ravenclaw table, clearly preparing to dump ink on the seats. The two exchanged a brief look, and Sagres allowed himself a small smile. Peeves, however, froze in mid-sway and then tumbled into the aisle like a limp bat. Professor Flitwick, dusting the sorting hat, caught sight of Sagres and his face brightened. Phileas, your cufflink, Professor McGonagall murmured, prompting Madame Norris to lift her head from a nap. The little charms professor smoothed down his sleeve. A plain silver cufflink had slipped awry. He stepped toward the doorway, pleasantly surprised. Ah, Sagres! Long time, Professor Flitwick, Sagres said, bowing slightly and offering both hands. In the corner, the usually impassive Snape scowled in annoyance. Candles and torches cast dancing shadows across the hall. From somewhere beyond came the clamor of students. The first years huddled together, their robes still smelling faintly of white wind and nerves. Professor McGonagall, in emerald robes, walked briskly down the marble steps, a roll of parchment clutched in one hand. Her sharp gaze swept the newcomers, and the hall fell silent, as if under a freezing charm. Welcome to Hogwarts, she said, voice carrying easily to every corner. Before you sit down to the start of term feast, you must first be sorted. The sorting ceremony will decide which house will be your home for the next 7 years. They are the brave Gryffindor, the loyal Hufflepuff, the wise Ravenclaw, and the cunning Slytherin. Each house has a long and proud history and has produced countless witches and wizards who have contributed greatly to the magical world. During your time at Hogwarts, your house will be like a second family. Successes will bring glory and points. Rule-breaking will bring loss of reputation and points deducted. At the end of the year, the house with the most points will win the House Cup, a great honor for any student. She raised her wand. Its tip flashed silver, and the first years fell into a neat single file. Line up and follow me. She paused at the great oak doors and turned back to the pale, anxious faces. Her tone softened, though her authority remained absolute. Do not be nervous. The sorting will not harm you. All you need do is put on the sorting hat. It will see what is in your mind and will announce where you belong. She gave the briefest hint of a smile before resuming her stern composure and led the line forward. The great hall watched in respectful silence as she placed a 4-legged stool at the front. On it sat the battered, patched sorting hat. Professor McGonagall stepped aside, hands clasped over her chest, eyes sharp as she supervised the proceedings. The hat, cracked and threadbare, suddenly began to speak and then to sing. You may not think I'm pretty, but don't judge by what you see. I'll eat myself if you can find a smarter hat than me. You can keep your bowlers black, your top hats sleek and tall, for I'm the Hogwarts sorting hat, and I can cap them all. There's nothing hidden in your head the sorting hat can't see, so try me on and I will tell you where you ought to be. Oh, you may be brave and true, or loyal, just and kind, or clever, witty and wise, or cunning, ambitious and sly. But no matter what you are, the sorting hat will know, and you will be sorted into the house where you belong. So put me on. Don't be afraid. In my hands, though I have no hands, you are absolutely safe, for I am a thinking magic hat. When the song finished, Professor McGonagall opened her parchment. Now, the sorting will begin. When I call your name, come and sit on the stool. Hannah Abbott. A small witch stepped forward, sat on the stool, and McGonagall placed the hat upon her head. "Hufflepuff," the hat declared, and the Hufflepuff table cheered. Sagres smiled at the familiar scene and felt his memories drift back 10 years to his own first night at Hogwarts. Voldemort had only recently fallen. The hall smelled of old oak and candle smoke, much as it did now. 11-year-old Sagres had walked up, clutching a second-hand wand, his cuff still smudged with coal dust from Nocturne Alley. When the hat settled on his head, voices hissed from the tables. "A mudblood dares to hold a wand?" A sneer slithered from Slytherin. "Blood traitor, filthy half-blood. He's not one of the Greengrass family." The noises blotted out, and the hat's voice slid into his mind. "All right, let me see which house suits you. Ah, you are full of ambition, but you disdain honor. You possess courage, yet you scorn recklessness. You are loyal and just, but you cannot tolerate sloth or mediocrity. You have great wisdom, yet there is an arrogance and aloofness. How strange, you show the qualities of all four houses, yet in thought contradict each one. This will be a difficult choice. Send me to Ravenclaw," a small inner voice urged. "Ravenclaw? It would suit you, though you may not suit it, but since you insist." "Then, Gryffindor," the hat snapped, and cheers erupted down the Gryffindor table. The memory broke as the Sorting Hat finished another name at the staff table. Applause rose when the boy with glasses was sorted into Gryffindor. Sagres looked up and saw the famous Harry Potter, the same thin, bespectacled boy he'd met on the Hogwarts Express. He had been reserved on the train, his glasses held together with tape, clearly not thriving in his Muggle home. Sagres felt a measure of relief. He understood why Dumbledore had sent the boy to the Muggle world. Beyond protection, it kept the child away from constant adulation. Everyone in the wizarding world already knew Harry's name. Fame at that age could rot a character. Left among perpetual veneration, what sort of person might the savior become? Sagres thought the boy's current guarded demeanor might be the healthier choice. Timid, perhaps, but not yet spoiled by fame. 4. New professor and first lesson. When the starlight from the great hall's dome streamed through the stained glass windows, Dumbledore tapped his golden goblet. The dancing sugared gingerbread men froze mid-step and scurried back onto the platter under Professor McGonagall's stern glare. "Before dinner begins, I have a few more announcements to make," Dumbledore continued, seeing that everyone was watching him. "Firstly, Mr. Filch has asked me to remind you that no spells are to be cast in the corridors." A murmur ran through the tables, but no one objected. "You will also notice notices around the castle stating that the right side of the 4th floor corridor is off-limits to all students, no exceptions. The forest on the Marauders' map is marked as the Forbidden Forest, and no student may enter it. It is full of dangers. We are also fortunate to welcome 2 new members of staff this term." The headmaster's blue eyes swept the staff table, and only then did Sargeras finally put down his fork. "The first is our new Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher, Professor Quirinus Quirrell." Professor Quirrell, wrapped in his purple turban, rose with a nervous smile and knocked over his mead. As the liquid began to lap toward his copy of Curses and Counter-Curses, Sargeras frowned and tapped the edge of the table. The mead flowed back into the cup as if pulled by an invisible hand, to Quirrell's dazed relief. "And given new regulations from the Ministry of Magic, and in order to strengthen both the practical skills and theoretical foundations of Hogwarts graduates," Dumbledore went on, "the school board has decided to introduce a new course, Charms Theory and Practice." He inclined his head toward the staff table and added, "Professor Sagres Greengrass will be responsible for this subject. All students who have passed their owls will be required to take it." There were immediate reactions along the student tables. At the Slytherin table, Draco Malfoy muttered, "My father says some people don't even have Newt certificates." "Keep it down." Crabbe and Goyle hissed at him. Malfoy fell silent, but scowled. Sargeras stood and nodded politely to the headmaster. He did not try to silence the whispers. Such chatter meant little to him. Then a raven descended from the rafters and landed on his shoulder. Its feathers were ragged, its left eye glowed black as obsidian, and its beak still held half a shard of mithril. "Quiet," the bird croaked, its voice like rusty hinges, and an eerie hush ran through the hall. The students' hair rose under the raven's unnatural tone. Sargeras raised a hand, calming the restless creature, and then spoke in a composed voice that carried to every corner of the room. I am Sagres Greengrass. Call me madman, scholar, murderer. Label me as you wish. A friendly reminder. In my classroom, truth will be a hungry beast. Be prepared. He sat down. For a moment there was stunned silence. Then the Ravenclaw table erupted in applause. Sargeras had once been one of their own, a notorious and brilliant former Ravenclaw. Dumbledore finished his announcements, and the feast officially began. I think Dumbledore's gone soft, Daphne Greengrass said loudly at the Slytherin table, brandishing a butter knife in mock disgust. He actually let a murderer teach us? Pansy Parkinson sneered. What can a half-blood teach? How to brew a potion with mudblood snot. Daphne's jaw tightened. Shut up. He's a filthy mudblood. The family disowned him. Malfoy, unable to resist, leaned in. I heard he personally sent 2 of your uncles to Azkaban. I thought so, Daphne snapped, slamming a copy of the Daily Prophet onto the table. Among the 5 dark wizards who were blown up, 2 were your father's comrades. How dare you? Keep it down, Crabbe hissed, terrified. Didn't your elders warn you? Don't provoke him. He's killed people from more than one pure-blood family. A knife scraped a plate. The long table fell into a strained, anxious silence. Later, in the Gryffindor common room, Harry and Ron sat by the fire talking about the new professor. News of Sagres Greengrass had spread everywhere. Harry watched the flames and felt his scar throb faintly. He remembered the quick, narrow look Greengrass had given Quirrell at dinner, something like Vernon Dursley finding a spider in a jam jar. It had unnerved him, though Ron thought he was being paranoid. That bird was horrible, Ron said, exaggerating as usual. I've never heard a talking raven before, and its voice was proper nasty. Harry, uncharacteristically subdued, agreed. It didn't sound like an ordinary raven. What else could it be? Ron brightened. Making a bird talk. That's dark arts stuff for sure. What are the dark arts? Harry asked. He hadn't been in the wizarding world long and still only had a sketchy idea of many things. As the name says, dark magic. Bad magic, Ron replied. Harry hesitated. But I don't think Professor Greengrass is a bad person. He helped you with your trunk on the train. I know, but the prophet says he killed people. That was self-defense, Hermione snapped as she marched up, holding fantastic beasts and where to find them. And that wasn't a raven. Loctus is a Nakafaran raven, a magical creature that can speak naturally. She fixed Ron and Harry with a warning look. And you'd better not be speaking ill of a professor behind his back, or Gryffindor will lose points. With that, she turned and strode off, leaving Harry and Ron to stare after her. Who does she think she is? Ron muttered. Forget it, Harry said. Hermione's probably made him her new idol. An idol? Ron asked. Like someone you admire too much. Ah, Ron said, satisfied, sort of like Death Eaters worshipping you-know-who. Charms class debut. Tuesday morning's Charms theory class was Sagres Greengrass's first lesson at Hogwarts. The Charms classroom in Ravenclaw Tower had been rearranged since his student days. Oak long tables replaced by circular stone platforms, and a floating crystal prism now hung in the center. Sargeras stood on a platform, scanned the room quickly, and nodded. Very good. Everyone is present. I'll spare you introductions, but since this is a new course, I must tell you what to expect. He tapped the lectern with his wand. The lectern rose and hovered. The copy of Introduction to Magic in his hand melted into a silver liquid that rose and reformed into shifting words. Charms, theory, and practice. This course teaches 2 things, he announced. Charms theory and spellcasting practice. He surveyed a room full of attentive 6th years and allowed a small smile. Years of strict methods had not been wasted. Then he added, this is not Professor Flitwick's Charms class. This course will not be based on the standard book of spells. A Ravenclaw student raised a hand. But Professor, isn't the material in the standard book historically validated? Sargeras did not turn his head. The standard book of spells you use is a product of the 1890 spell standardization movement, just over 100 years old. Magic had already flourished in many directions long before that. A nervous murmur rose. But I know what you want to say, Sargeras interrupted gently. Of course you need to prepare for next year's newts. Do not worry, this course will not give you homework that adds to your burden. In fact, mastering these ideas will make passing the newts easier. At the mention of no homework, the students began whispering excitedly. "Professor, really, no homework?" someone asked. Sargeras's lips curved slightly. "Of course not. After all." He drew an arc with his wand, and with a soft click, all the doors and windows in the classroom locked. "Practice will be the homework. Before I start, any questions?" A small Hufflepuff boy raised his hand with a shaky voice. "Professor Greengrass, is this course just to help us with exams?" "Excellent question." Sargeras nodded. "But no." He let his eyes run over the student's mouth. "You should ask yourselves instead, what does the world demand of you after you leave Hogwarts? How many Aurors die each year? How many unbreakable runes will a Cursebreaker face in a lifetime? What do St. Mungo's healers do when a patient is at death's door?" Seeing blank faces, he continued, quieter now. "The Standard Book of Spells teaches simple standard methods. It is not comprehensive, nor always the most effective." He spun his wand. The silver words dissolved into stardust and painted the dome with scenes of medieval wizards carving runes and inscribing spells. The ministry introduced charms theory and practice to give underage wizards survival skills beyond the exam syllabus. Whether you wish to be an auror, a scholar, an alchemist, or a healer, this course will forge a cornerstone for your future. A ripple of silver light swept over the platforms. Jeanette White, a Ravenclaw prefect in the front row, felt her pupils tighten, an odd smoothing sensation passed through her thoughts. One by one, the students' eyes sharpened with an unnatural clarity. "Professor?" Her voice sounded steadier than she expected. Sargeras descended the floating steps. "Emotion is the fog of cognition," he said. "In my class, you must have absolute rationality." A tall, thin boy raised his hand. "Did you just cast a spell on us?" "I believe so." Another student observed, examining himself. "I feel calmer than before." "This is irregular," the Hufflepuff protested, though his voice lacked its earlier tremor. "The ministry." Sargeras brushed the open textbooks of the front row with 2 fingers. "Mechanical mind," he said, "authorized by the ministry's Department of Education. It maintains absolute rationality for 90 minutes. Its effect is contained within this classroom." "Professor Greengrass, we've never heard of that spell," someone muttered. "Because it is my own emotional enchantment." As he spoke, every textbook flew open to page 12. The heading read, Lesson 1, The Distribution of Magical Nodes in Accio. For the next 90 minutes, only Sargeras's voice filled the room. When the last luminescent thread evaporated from the prism and the bell rang, students blinked as their emotions returned. The complex runic pathways and spell decay formulas had been impressed on their minds as if carved. They understood, finally, why Sargeras had promised that everyone would gain something in his class. If Harry had been present, he would have been certain even Neville Longbottom could now recite the formulas perfectly. Sargeras waved his wand and restored the lectern to its place. "Spellcasting practice will be held next Tuesday," he announced, then simply turned and left without looking back. The classroom erupted into chatter. "That was incredible. No notes needed," the Hufflepuff boy said, staring at his blank parchment. "I remember every word." "If only other teachers could do this," someone else began. Excitement buzzed through the room as the students filed out, already anticipating what the next lesson might bring. 5. Dumbledore's tea party time flew, and Thursday had arrived. In the meantime, Sagres had given the young 6th and 7th years 2 more lessons. Professor Greengrass had quietly become the most popular teacher among the upper years at Hogwarts. There was no homework, and the lessons were surprisingly effective, rare at a school of magical habits and red tape. When Sagres himself had been at Hogwarts, those students had been 1st and 2nd years. In a way, they were his former classmates. Now he was their professor. He had never expected to enjoy teaching, but he did. He had spent the entire morning in the restricted section and only looked up when Fawkes, the phoenix, burst into the library in a flare of flame. The bird carried a small note in its beak. "Don't forget this afternoon's tea party." "What a bother," Sagres muttered, waving his wand to replace the books on their shelves. He nodded at Fawkes, who vanished in a flash of fire along with a man's silhouette. A sharp cry split the quiet. Loctis, the raven that liked to perch on the ceiling, had been startled awake and was shrieking. Madame Pince hurried by clutching her skirts, face pinched with outrage and surprise. The students made way instinctively. Sagres, if you ever bring that stupid raven into the library again, I shall ask Dumbledore to ban you from the library for good, she hissed. Her fury made even the students pull in their necks. None of them had seen Madame Pince like that before. Later, in Dumbledore's office, wool-thin fingertips rubbing the edge of his half-moon spectacles, the headmaster smiled and asked, "Coffee, mead, or black tea?" Sagres ignored the options and looked instead at the portraits on the walls: Eosa Salkendenberg, Ambrose Swart, Dilys Derwent, Phineas Nigellus Black, Armando Dippet, muttering among themselves. He picked up a cup of coffee from a gilded tray and, as if on cue, 3 sugar cubes hopped into it. He sipped once, then set the cup down calmly. "Is there something you need, Professor Dumbledore?" "I should be getting back to the library to prepare for my lessons," he said lightly. "Since you began working here, you have spent most of your time in the library," Dumbledore said without malice, exposing the little white lie. "I have never once seen you in your office preparing." "I think I teach well enough," Sagres replied with the same casual tone. Dumbledore opened a drawer and produced 3 letters sealed with the ministry's wax. The scarlet signature of Cornelius Fudge caught the light on the last one. Sagres' expression tightened. "I'm not questioning your methods, Sagres," Dumbledore said, weary, "nor your results. The students' marks speak for themselves. What I want to know is, when did the Department of Magical Education authorize you to use those spells on underage students in class?" Sagres' face did not change. "Professor, we agreed in Azkaban." Dumbledore's nod acknowledged it, but he continued, "Even so, you should have informed me, and lying to underage students is not something a professor should do." Sagres bristled. The situation tugged at memories he didn't like, but he kept his voice flat. "I don't consider it a lie. My spells never harm the students." He laid a fingertip on the letters. A pale flame curled up and consumed them to ash. "If Lord Voldemort or Grindelwald sat here right now, the Ministry wouldn't have dared to send these letters. They have no respect for you." "That is because people fear them, child," Dumbledore said softly. "Fear is not the same as respect." "I respect your choice, Albus." For the first time, he used the headmaster's given name. "But I am not you. I don't like people telling me what to do." He drew a slender silver mark on the table with his wand. "I won't be dictated to, especially when I'm not wrong. My request is simple. Whether out of respect or fear, don't cross me." Dumbledore opened his mouth, but Sagres cut him off. "They can play their politics, but they must know their audience. To some extent, Principal, your tolerance has let them grow arrogant." "The greater the power one possesses, the less authority one should wield," Dumbledore said quietly. "No one can guarantee they won't make mistakes." "I don't disagree." Sagres inclined his head. "But I do not have your breadth of patience. If those politicians come after me, I will teach them how the wizarding world really works." He finished speaking and vanished. Dumbledore stared at the empty office, then sighed. Dilys Derwent's portrait murmured, "The child is right, Albus. Sometimes fear teaches more than kindness." Dumbledore didn't answer, only dropped a screeching sugar cube into his tea. "He can apparate in Hogwarts now," he said, sipping. "He is stronger than I expected." "You cannot control everything," Armando Dippet put in. "He is nothing like Tom. You need not fear the same darkness." Dumbledore tried to repair the silver mark on the table with his wand and found he could not. A soft scoff echoed from somewhere among the portraits, and Dumbledore turned without finding its source. Sagres' apparition at the edge of the pumpkin patch had driven a few ravens into flight. He shook grass and damp leaves from his robe and looked up at the crooked door of Hagrid's hut. Twilight had blurred the forbidden forest into a blue-gray mass. Warm light leaked from the cottage windows into the chill air. Apparating at Hogwarts had never been straightforward. He had expended a good deal of magic, but he wanted Dumbledore to know he was no longer a fifth-year student. He needed supplies. He knocked. The door opened slowly. "Professor Greengrass?" Hagrid peered out. "Afternoon, Hagrid," Sagres said. He glanced past Hagrid and saw 2 small figures nearly swallowed by great armchairs, Harry and Ron. Hagrid beamed. "Do you have guests?" "Oh, do come in, Professor," Hagrid said, moving aside. "I invited Harry and Ron over for tea to celebrate their enrollment." Sagres stepped inside. Harry's fingers picked at a chip on his teacup. Ron's ears were a little red under his hair. Both sprang up immediately. "Good afternoon, Professor." they said in awkward unison. Call me Sagres. He turned to Hagrid. I came to ask a favor. You want something? Hagrid's voice rumbled. I need unicorn tail hair and some whomping willow branches, if you have them. Hagrid's grin could have split a rock. Buy? It's my pleasure, that is. He dug a patched dragon-hide pouch from a peg, thumbed through it, and produced a handful of pure white hair. Just collected under the moon last week. Took a lot of work. He fumbled another bundle from a shelf. And these humping willow bits are from last year. Should do fine. Thank you, Hagrid. Sagres tucked the materials into an inner pocket and, on impulse, waved his wand. The hut, which had looked as if a tornado had passed through it, tidied itself in a blink. Hagrid stared, then thanked him again, astonished. It's nothing, Sagres said. And Hagrid, this Christmas, leave the tree moving and decorating to me. No refusing. Hagrid hesitated, then burst into a delighted grin. Of course, don't be daft. Thank you, Sagres. As Sagres left, Hagrid lingered in the doorway, smiling after him. Harry nudged Fang aside and leaned forward. Hagrid, do you know Professor Greengrass well? Hagrid wiped his beard with a huge hand. We know each other, but not closely. He put a rock cake into his mouth, thought a moment, then continued. He used to come round to ask about creatures in the forest when he was at school. Might surprise you, he was a Ravenclaw. No way, Ron said. We thought he had. He stopped, remembering the stories that had already been whispered. Why was he expelled then? Hagrid's face tightened. He looked reluctant, but spoke anyway. He was in his 5th year. Stayed at school every day for 5 years straight, hardly ever went home. As he got deeper into his studies, he broke more rules. Read from the restricted section without permission, snuck out of the castle at night, went into the forest on his own. Once a spell went wrong and burned a large part of the forest, the ministry put a lot of pressure on Dumbledore, and he had to make a choice, expulsion. Harry glanced between Hagrid and Ron. Do you think he was studying the dark arts? Hagrid shrugged. I dunno. He's not a bad man. Even before he was expelled, he helped me with the Christmas tree, offered to do the work himself. That didn't sound like the sort of person who'd go looking for dark magic just for the sake of it. Ron leaned in, eager. So he helped you, even though he'd been expelled before Christmas? Hagrid nodded slowly, eyes far away in memory. Aye, he may have been wild, but he had his reasons, and he wasn't all bad. 6. Past late at night in the restricted section, moonlight poured through the high window, tracing a black lattice across mold-stained parchment. Sagres held the potion in his hand, hesitated, then pried open Loctus's beak and forced it down the raven's throat. He had already cast a throat-locking tongue-tie to stop the stupid bird from going mad. The raven's metallic black feathers shivered as faint patterns shimmered over them. While he waited for the potion to take effect, Sagres's thoughts drifted back over the years. He had lived in this world for 21 years. By now, he had created 7 major spells with his awakened gift and had derived and refined many more. Those spells had once been his lifeline. But that gift had stopped working 3 years ago, on the night of his coming-of-age ceremony. The ability required continued magical growth, and a wizard's magic did not expand forever. From his first outburst at 5, through the consolidation of his power in adulthood, Sagres's growth had slowed and almost ground to a halt by 18. It was the natural limit of a wizard. Even a transmigrator could not break it. Though his total magic exceeded that of an ordinary adult, it was only comparable to the combined power of 3 veteran duelists. He doubted it could rival an elder like Dumbledore. Still, the potency of his spells was not less. He knew his spellcraft had long escaped the constraints of raw magical volume. Precision and control could shape every drop of magic into a blade. That obsession had roots in his childhood. After leaving his family, he had become ravenous for knowledge and power. Dark arts, ancient war magic, runecraft, he devoured it all. He had scoured decaying ruins and long-forgotten texts, making their magic his own. He had read nearly every book in the libraries of Hogwarts, Durmstrang, and Ilvermorny, and in the year he traveled afterward, he had visited Bosbatons, the Moon Mountain School in Uganda, and a magical institute on a volcanic island in Japan. The principals never knew he had studied in their stacks. Years of day and night study, nourished by countless tomes, had turned the boy who once cowered in the Greengrass family's private library into a wizard who could make the magical world tremble. Creating and improving spells had become instinct, not reliant on external power, but on the knowledge in his mind. Sagres tapped the table. Loctis, preening, looked up. Its obsidian eyes flashed, and the corner of his mouth curved. He remembered the life and death crisis in the North Sea 3 years ago. He had been experimenting on apparition. The spatial ripples disturbed a sleeping Norwegian sea monster. Tentacles like giant pythons shot up from the trench and tightened on him. He had been lost in the illusion the creature cast, the salty sea filling his nose, until Loctis's choking cry tore through the spell. If the bird hadn't screamed, he might have become a skeleton in the monster's lair. The memory still made him shiver. Furious and terrified, he had drawn his wand and released his most potent magic. Scarlet spelllight ripped through the water curtain and reduced the mountain-sized octopus to meat. And the damned trip to Beauxbatons, Loctis, gnawing on mithril bindings in the library, had awakened a dark arts tome dormant for 2 centuries. The raven had panicked, flapping between the rafters and brushing wards into activation until the school raised a full dark creature alert. Sagres caught the bird by the neck beneath a gargoyle's watchful eye. The idiot still clutched a half-chewed strip of mithril. Footsteps interrupted his recollection. Snape glided in, wrapped in his customary black robes. He regarded Sagres with an expressionless face, then a look of unmistakable disgust as his gaze settled on the raven. Sagres, only you would keep such a peculiar creature. Sagres bowed his head solemnly. Indeed, Professor Snape. Snape's disdain deepened. What are you doing in the restricted section at this hour? His tone was sharp with suspicion. Sagres motioned to Loctis and replied with mock gravity, researching the dark arts and, of course, how to rule the world. Snape scoffed. Before he could reply, Sagres flicked his wand and the throat-locking tongue-tie slipped away. Loctis flew to his shoulder and cried, "Caw, caw! Shut up, you idiot!" Sagres snapped, then turned to Snape with a conciliatory air. "My apologies, Professor Snape. I wasn't talking about you." "Sagres," Snape's face darkened, "perhaps you should learn to respect your former professor." "Of course, Professor." Sagres smiled a polite, almost poisonous smile. "I assure you I hold you in the highest regard, but if you feel I've offended you, by all means, deduct points." He bowed slightly, then as he turned to go, he added, glancing back, "Oh, actually, you can't deduct points anymore. I'm no longer a Hogwarts student." Ignoring Snape's sour expression, Sagres left the library with Loctis on his shoulder. He knew Snape disliked him, and the feeling was mutual. Their feud had a long history. As a student, Sagres had been the target of constant insults and curses, especially from Slytherin. At first, the words didn't bother him. What could attacking a wizard with a modern, adult mind accomplish? Little. He ignored them. But his silence only encouraged them. They grew bolder and turned to dark curses. Sagres suffered a few petty humiliations, swollen faces, sudden hair growth, easily fixed by Madame Pomfrey, but irksome. He could not stand for physical attacks. After a time, he began to respond in kind. Sagres spent his days in class and in the library, but he also began intercepting lone Slytherins at night, teaching them practical lessons with his wand at their throats. Hogwarts buzzed with the repercussions. Usually, after roughing someone up, he would heal them to avoid official punishment, though he gave no thought to their psychological scars. His severity unnerved many, and influential pureblood families pressured Snape. The Slytherin head boy confronted Sagres repeatedly, and when fairness vanished and the head boy's snide protection earned him detention regardless of justice, Sagres tried reporting it to Dumbledore, but with little effect. So Sagres escalated. He sought trouble, punished those who deserved it, then denied any involvement when students reported him. The stalemate ended when Dumbledore placed a trace on Sagres' second-hand wand. The mark meant the headmaster could see every spell cast with it if he chose. That evening, Sagres climbed to the top of Ravenclaw Tower, the wind filling his robes, and sealed the wand in a dragonhide case. He started practicing silent, wandless magic on the astronomy tower roof. If not for the imprint of 9 years of compulsory education from his previous life, the world might have gained another Dark Lord. He had the power and the temperament. But his relentless practice paid off. His wandless magic grew virtually as strong as with a wand. Everything came to a head in his 5th year. After devouring countless books in the Hogwarts library, he began creating spells on his own. One night in the Forbidden Forest, he summoned his Patronus, a raven. He was disappointed with the Patronus charm's limited function and sought to combine it with other magics to increase its bite. He paired it with fiend fire. Pale flames erupted from the white raven, an eerie and dangerous variant of fiend fire, bizarre in shape and harder to control than anything he'd seen. The raven flew, tailing blazing light that warped the air. For a heartbeat, Sagres thought he had succeeded, until the Patronus began to wail and turned to ash in its own flames. Fiendfire burned everything around him to cinders. He was lucky the spell didn't spiral entirely out of control. Snape came upon the scorched wasteland and, with a hint of triumph, told him the trace meant expulsion was unavoidable. "Get ready to be expelled," he said. Sagres's yew wand cracked subtly in his hand. He laughed, a brittle sound, then unleashed a torrent of magic. Dozens of colored spell lights exploded above the Forbidden Forest, a terrifying display that rocked Hogwarts. The trace in his wand smoked and seemed to dissipate under the strain of the cast. Standing amid the burned earth, wand charred, Sagres stared at Snape as the potions professor emerged from the trees. "If I had wanted to," Sagres said flatly, "you would have died just now." Snape said nothing. Shock flickered behind his composure. "If I had not restrained myself," Sagres went on, voice low and hard, "do you think you and your pure-blood brats would still be sitting safely in these halls?" He thought back over those years and felt the bile rise. He was leaving the castle, and he would not go quietly. Turning to Dumbledore, who had appeared in the Phoenix's light, Sagres's voice grew bitter. "You and Dumbledore show no fairness. Is it because of my bloodline? When those noble names cursed my origin, when I was being tormented, where were you then? Why did you come so quickly, only to expel me now?" Dumbledore's voice was calm. "Sagres, you have broken too many rules." "You wished it, Severus Snape," Sagres said, looking at the potions master. "You drove me out of Hogwarts." After a last hard look at Dumbledore, he apparated away. There was nothing more to say. As he vanished from the castle for the final time, a small regret crossed his mind. It was a pity he hadn't finished reading the books in the Hogwarts library. Halloween time flew by, and by October Hogwarts had grown colder. The first month of term had passed peacefully, with only a few minor incidents. The most talked-about news was that Harry Potter had been chosen as Gryffindor's youngest seeker in 100 years. The other frequent comment concerned Professor Quirinus Quirrell, who had turned defense against the dark arts into a textbook example of how not to teach. That surprised Sagres. Quirrell had once been a Ravenclaw like him, and during his own student days he'd shown excellent theoretical knowledge. He'd always been timid and introverted, but clever. When Quirrell had briefly taught Muggle studies back then, Sagres had sat in on his lessons, and bluntly, they weren't great. Quirrell balanced an interest in Muggle things with an ingrained prejudice common in the wizarding world. Still, what students said now suggested he had not merely failed to improve with age, he'd gotten much worse. None of it particularly concerned Sagres. Dumbledore had invited him back to teach. If Quirrell could do little more than fumble in the classroom, that was the headmaster's business. Sagres only needed to teach his own classes well. He toyed with the Raven's new obsidian eye. His research had hit a bottleneck lately. He needed something to distract him. Replacing one of the bird's eyes would do. He'd already commissioned a custom piece. A gray owl arrived with a parcel, which Sagres took out the window, slipping a handful of mithril flakes into his sleeve as payment. Inside was a constantly rotating magical eyeball, crafted by master alchemist Barclay, Moody's eye maker by recommendation of the infamous Auror. This eye was smaller than Moody's and built as a scrying mirror. It would transmit only what Loctis saw. It still refracted magic and could emit light and play pre-recorded messages. For a messenger raven, that was plenty. He fitted the eye into the raven's socket, then, remembering the owl still at the sill, slapped his forehead. "Sorry, force of habit." He offered it some nearly expired treats, sent the owl on its way, and let Loctis take to the air for a test flight. From its new vantage, Sagres watched a group of students training on the Quidditch pitch. Late October and Halloween had decked the castle with floating jack-o'-lanterns and bats. The great hall buzzed with a festive air. Sagres sat at the staff table with little appetite for the extravagant feast. He had at first wanted to skip it, but Phileas Flitwick, his old dean, had done him many favors during his student days, and he couldn't refuse. Students laughed and ate. Professors exchanged small talk. The castle ghosts were absent, as usual. Only Peeves drifted about, causing mischief. Not everyone was at supper. Hermione Granger, brilliant and fastidious, was hiding in a stall in the girls' bathroom, crying. Nearly 2 months into term, she still had no close friends, and today Ron Weasley had spoken badly of her in front of others after she corrected his technique in charms. She had tried to help, and he had turned on her. She felt foolish, alone, and humiliated. Sagres watched the crowd at the staff table and found his gaze settling on Harry Potter. As a transmigrator, he kept wondering about the story he'd left behind, the tale of how a baby had defeated Lord Voldemort. It had been done 11 years ago, when Harry was an infant, so how had the books written that story? Did they misrepresent what had actually happened? Had Voldemort truly died? The question circled his mind like loose teeth. A panicked cry cut through the hall. "Troll!" Professor Quirrell burst in, flustered and out of breath. "There's a troll in the dungeons." He ran straight to Dumbledore, gasping, and then, as if overwhelmed, fainted to the floor in a neat comic collapse. Chaos erupted. Students screamed and scrambled, faces pale. Sagres remained seated, watching calmly enough, though he too wondered how a troll could get into Hogwarts. Quirrell's collapse felt oddly theatrical rather than merely fearful. "Silence!" Dumbledore's wand cracked with a few sharp noises, and the hall hushed. "Prefects, lead the students back to their dormitories. Professors, accompany me to the dungeons." Under the headmaster's steady voice, order returned. Students clustered under their prefect's guidance. Ron leaned toward Harry. "Hermione doesn't know. She's still in the girls' bathroom crying." Harry's face set. "We have to tell her." He slipped out of line with Ron into the confusion, determined. Sagres stood as well and waved to Loctus, who alighted on his arm. He, McGonagall, Snape, and a few other professors headed to the dungeons. Dumbledore and Snape fell back from the group and vanished down another corridor together. The dungeons showed no sign of a troll. "It's not here," McGonagall said, perplexed. "There's no troll." "It was here," Sagres said, casually sniffing the air. "I can smell it." He turned to the teachers. "Phileas, Pomona, watch the students. Don't let them near this area. I know." Sagres released Loctus with a sharp, quiet command. "Find it." The Raven shot down the corridor, eyes transmitting live images to Sagres. Screams suddenly rose from the direction of the girls' bathroom. Loctus veered and flew straight toward it. Through the Raven's sight, Sagres saw what the other professors did not. He vanished in a blur of movement before their eyes. The bathroom was wrecked. Basins and stalls lay smashed. Pipes burst, water spraying everywhere. In a corner, Hermione cowered, trembling. Near her, Ron hurled broken wood at a hulking mountain troll. Harry dangled by one ankle, held upside down. The troll gripped him in one massive fist while clubbing a wooden bat in the other. The creature was gray, lumpy, and vast. Its flat, calloused feet pad-slammed the marble. Loctus let out a piercing cry. In an instant, Sagres, Professor Greengrass, appeared in the doorway, his movement timed perfectly with the bird's shriek. He raised his wand with a cold, decisive calm and spoke a single spell. Crimson Tear. A ribbon of blood-red light shot from his wand and struck the troll. Flesh and bone exploded outward as the creature collapsed into a ruin of minced meat. The force of the magic sent blood and gore slapping the walls, casting a monstrous crimson silhouette across the tiles. In a heartbeat, the danger was over. Harry, soaked in gore and reeling, gagged at the smell. Sagres lowered his wand. Scourgify. A wave of air and light swept the three students clean. Their robes were spotless, their hair dry and neat, the water gone. Sagres moved among the wreckage with intent. Reparo. Basins reassembled and pipes threaded themselves back into place. Water flowed back into its channels as if nothing had happened. He picked up a wand from the floor and slipped it back into Harry's hand. As the trio began to speak, he lifted a hand to silence them. Corpse Accio. The troll's remains rose, congealed, and formed into a floating sphere. Slim threads of coagulated blood stitched up the seams. The sphere hovered in front of everyone, suspended like a grotesque lantern. "No need to explain," Sagres said, the ghost of a smile on his face. Save your excuses for your dean. I doubt she'll be pleased to learn you were in the bathroom at this hour." At that moment, hurried steps sounded down the corridor. Snape, Quirrell, and McGonagall appeared in the doorway, their faces a mixture of confusion and barely concealed anger. 8. Aftermath. The three professors who had just arrived stood in the spotless bathroom, their expressions a mixture of disbelief and confusion. "It was a 12-foot mountain troll, and I've already dealt with it," Professor Sagres said calmly. They all looked at him. Snape's voice was sharp. "Dealt with? How did you deal with it? Stunned it? Expelled it? Killed it?" "The situation was critical," Sagres replied. "For Mr. Potter's safety, I had to take drastic measures." He produced the floating spherical mass, the troll's corpse, and a few of the professors frowned. That answered their questions. Sagres nodded, snapped his fingers, and said lightly, "Boom." A white flame sprang up out of nowhere, consuming the spherical corpse until it was reduced to ash. A breeze carried the last motes into the nearest toilet. The lid closed, the flush button pressed, and the enormous troll was gone. Professor McGonagall's eyes fell to the three first-years lingering in the doorway. Worse, all three were Gryffindors. Her voice cut through the silence. "You three, how did you end up here?" She pointed at Ron, whose hair was still a mess. "Weasley, you tell me what happened." Ron shuffled forward, excuses tumbling through his head, but none of them made sense. He hung his head and admitted defeat. "I'm sorry, Professor McGonagall. It was me. I went looking for it." Hermione blurted, voice shaking. "I read about mountain trolls in a book and thought I could handle one. Harry and Ron came to save me." McGonagall's surprise was visible. She hadn't expected Miss Granger to be so reckless. She composed herself and pronounced judgment. "Miss Granger, your foolishness costs Gryffindor 5 points." Hermione's head dropped in shame. Then McGonagall turned to the boys. "As for Potter and Mr. Weasley, your courage in coming to your classmates' aid will earn Gryffindor 5 points each." Harry and Ron exchanged wide, relieved smiles. "But let this be a warning," McGonagall added. "Next time, do not try to handle something like this yourselves. You are still first years." Professor McGonagall, what she did was really dangerous," Quirrell stammered, earning a withering look from Snape. Ignoring the side remarks, McGonagall looked to Sagres. "Professor Sagres, please take these three back to their common room. Phileas tells me a few students were knocked from the moving staircases after dinner and are in the infirmary. They should not be left alone." "No problem, Professor," Sagres said. "I will personally see them to the Gryffindor common room." He waved to the three. "Come on, then." The three first-years followed him out like chastened little birds. Sagres glanced at Snape's torn trouser leg, then at the raven that had been perched on the cubicle door and fell in step behind the students. None of them spoke. It was understandable. Asking first-years to face a troll had been beyond reasonable expectations. Finally, Sagres broke the silence. "Cheer up. You all stood shoulder to shoulder with a giant and came out unscathed. That's something to be proud of, isn't it?" They looked embarrassed, remembering how ineptly they'd behaved. "Thank you, Professor Sagres," Hermione said, gratitude plain in her voice. Harry and Ron nodded in agreement. "Yes, Professor. Thank you for saving us." Sagres smiled and tapped Harry and Ron lightly with his wand. Warmth and a calm peace flowed through them. The tension melted. "Mr. Weasley, you both showed exceptional courage. That is a valuable trait, especially for Gryffindor." The compliment made the two boys flush and scratch their heads awkwardly. He tapped the still downcast Hermione as well, then asked, almost gently, "Miss Granger, have you heard of Amortentia?" "I have, Professor," Hermione replied, surprised at the question but honest. "I read about it in my potions textbook." "Amortentia can create the illusion of love," Sagres said. "But there is no potion in the world that can create friendship out of nothing, not even a false friendship. That's what makes friendship precious." He ushered them into the common room. In front of the fat lady's portrait, the three thanked Sagres again. Hermione waved at the raven. "Goodbye, Mr. Raven." The bird ignored her and fluffed its feathers. Late that night in the library, Sagres sat alone. A thought that had surfaced during dinner was sharpening into conviction. Lord Voldemort was not dead. The man who had once terrorized Britain had collapsed and vanished facing a baby. Many claimed he was dead, but Sagres now suspected that wasn't true. He resolved to ask Dumbledore about it at Thursday tea. Since the Halloween troll incident, Hermione had changed noticeably. In Ron's words, she suddenly became much nicer. The clever girl had learned an important lesson. Being right doesn't excuse an arrogant tone. The way you say things matters. Once she adjusted how she expressed herself, she fit in with the class far more easily. The crisis had bound the three together. Friendship had formed from shared danger, and it wasn't only because Hermione had taken the blame. If a bright, determined person decides to get along with you, she usually succeeds. Now the trio walked together toward the Quidditch pitch. The matches would start at the end of the month, and Harry needed to train. Hermione and Ron were coming to cheer. "So what was that spell?" Harry asked, turning to Hermione. She had been the one to answer most of their questions so far. "I don't know, Harry," Hermione said helplessly. This was the fourth time they'd asked. Ron, half hopeful, added, "I've heard older students rave about Professor Sagres's lessons. No homework, no notes, and everyone comes out much smarter." Draco Malfoy and his two cronies slid up beside them, Malfoy's voice slow and sneering. "He claims he's approved by the Ministry of Magic's Department of Education, but Fudge told my father there's no record of it." The trio ignored the interruption. Ron muttered to Harry and Hermione as if Malfoy wasn't there. "Look at him strutting about, as if his dad were the minister." Malfoy's face soured. He stepped in front of them, malicious. "Weasley, like your father, you lot do enjoy dealing with Muggle things." He glanced at Hermione and sneered. "Maybe you should go home and check if your fat mother's in the kitchen again." "Don't you dare insult my mother." Ron lunged for Malfoy's collar, fists flying, before a hollow voice behind them cut through. "Weasley, Gryffindor will lose 5 points for fighting." Snape had appeared without them noticing. His first words dragged 5 points off Gryffindor. Ron, furious, gaped at Malfoy. "He started it. He insulted my mother." "Contradicting a professor. Another 5 points," Snape said flatly. Ron opened his mouth to argue, but Harry and Hermione hauled him away. They walked toward the pitch bordering the Forbidden Forest, Ron still muttering under his breath. "You shouldn't have stopped me." "And let Snape keep finding excuses to dock points?" Hermione snapped. "Besides, I know," Ron grumbled. "Malfoy's a sneak. Last time he said he wanted to duel, then ran straight to Filch. Nearly got us expelled." He was calming, but his resentment lingered. "If I were as powerful as Professor Sagres, just one spell and I'd shut Malfoy up for good." "You can't just cast spells on students," Hermione warned. "Even as a professor, you wouldn't be allowed." Harry, remembering Sagres's wand taps on Halloween, couldn't help asking, "Do you think he was actually casting spells on students in his class?" Maybe that's what Malfoy meant. "The Malfoys exaggerate," Ron said stubbornly. "If Professor Sagres were doing anything illegal, why would he still be teaching here? Dumbledore invited him." Hermione didn't say anything. She suspected Draco might be telling the truth, but Ron was still angry, and she kept quiet. Harry found himself inclined to trust Dumbledore's judgment. Professor Sagres had been invited by the headmaster, after all. Still, the memory of the warm, peaceful feeling Sagres had given them nagged at him. "You should hurry up and train," Hermione said. "Wood should have been here hours ago." 9. Tutorial. How to deal with giant monsters. Sagres walked toward the Ravenclaw Astronomy Tower with his books under his arm. These were his last 2 classes in November. Soon after, the Quidditch House Cup would begin, and he planned to take some time away from Hogwarts for personal matters. The classroom was familiar and already filling with Ravenclaw and Hufflepuff students. To be honest, he preferred teaching those 2 houses. Gryffindor and Slytherin personalities were too fierce, and their students delighted in provoking each other. Even with reinforcement spells in place, some disruption was inevitable. Still, compared to most years, the current level of discipline in charms theory and practice, when Gryffindors and Slytherins were present, was practically a miracle. He scanned the room as he entered and immediately noticed 2 empty desks. "Where are Jellival and Runicell?" he asked. The Hufflepuff prefect stood up. "Professor, they were knocked down and broke a few bones at the Halloween feast. They're still in the infirmary." Sagres nodded, tapped his desk to call the room to order, and opened his textbook. "Today we'll discuss the evolution of Stupefy and the distribution of its magical nodes." "Professor," Jenny raised her hand and interrupted. Sagres frowned, but motioned for her to go on. Can you teach us how to deal with trolls? I heard the troll that broke into Hogwarts at Halloween was handled by you. Sagres refused at once. It's not that I won't teach you, but dangerous creatures fall under defense against the dark arts. That's your Data professor's subject, so you've come to the wrong person. But Professor, don't you know, Professor Quirrell, the defense against the dark arts classes in previous years haven't been very useful. We haven't learned much practical stuff. He looked over dozens of eager faces. The complaints weren't wrong. Hogwarts' Data curriculum had often been lacking. After a moment, he snapped his book shut. His expression softened. Since you insist, I'll give you some basic knowledge about trolls. A ripple of joy ran through the classroom. Sagres raised a hand to quiet them and began. First, trolls are classified as XXXXX level in the Ministry of Magic's system, dangerous but subduable creatures. Wizards divide them into 3 subspecies by habitat and appearance: mountain trolls, forest trolls, and swamp trolls. He exhaled, thinking of how little practical training the students received. The first, mountain trolls, are the largest. They have rough, light gray skin covered in warty protuberances and emit an awful stench. Their teeth and nails are yellow and filthy. They live in remote mountains or caves and wield crude wooden clubs or rocks. They're almost entirely driven by instinct, very aggressive, and extremely low in intelligence. He paused for emphasis. This is the most dangerous type. The second, forest trolls, have pale green skin that helps them blend into the woods. They're a bit smaller than mountain trolls, but more muscular, often using tree trunks or spiked clubs. They inhabit dense forests, primeval woodlands in northern and eastern Europe, for example. Forest trolls are slightly more cunning than mountain trolls. They're good at ambushes, camouflage, and setting traps. Seeing the students' anxious faces, Sagres added, "You needn't be overly worried. Forest trolls are very sensitive to fire magic. Flames will drive them off effectively." The third, swamp trolls, also called river trolls, have grayish-purple scale-like skin and wide, webbed feet suited to riverbeds. They have horn-like bumps on their heads and sharp teeth. They live in swamps, rivers, and lakes, especially across northern Europe. They dive well and can lurk underwater for long periods to ambush prey. They bite or smash with rocks. Notably, swamp trolls weaken if kept out of water too long. Dry environments restrict their movement. He reminded them, smiling slightly. Trolls are not giants. Giants are more intelligent and closer to humans. Trolls are purely wild, magical beasts. If you can't tell the difference, Professor Kettleburn might give you a hard knock with his alchemical prosthetic limb. Laughter bubbled through the room. Professor Kettleburn, their care of magical creatures teacher, was infamous for his scars from repeated run-ins with dangerous beasts and for his missing limbs. Sagres continued, all 3 types have thick hides and high magical resistance. To deal with them, you must combine knowledge of their weaknesses and habits and choose targeted spells and strategies. He glanced around and offered practical advice. If you ever encounter a troll in the wild, my first suggestion is to run. It's not that I don't trust you, it's that trolls offer nothing of value. Hunting them is usually a waste of time. The students nodded. Sagres went on, more satisfied. To avoid a low-intelligence troll, the obstacle charm, disillusionment charm, and homorphous charm are useful. The obstacle charm can impede movement. The homorphous charm can turn objects into bright animals to attract a troll's attention, and disillusionment will hide you so you can retreat. A hand went up. But Professor, what if we can't avoid it? Then you prepare to fight. Sagres wrote the words general principles in the air with his wand. His tone grew serious. First, maintain distance. Trolls are immensely strong but clumsy, so ranged attacks are safer. Second, exploit their weaknesses. Develop tactics based on the troll's habitat and physiology. Third, teamwork. Cooperation distracts a troll and raises your chances. He surprised the students by asking, so who can tell me which spells are best against trolls? Hands shot up. Sagres didn't call on anyone at once. As I said, no extra points for volunteering. Charles, you answer. Stupefy. Charles said. Robert? The conjunctivitis curse, Professor. Jenny? Expelliarmus might work. Clarice? Incendio and Lumos, Professor. Angvar? I'd use a binding spell to tie up its limbs. Sagres waved them to lower their hands. Trolls have high magical resistance. Charles, Stupefy will have little effect unless you hit the head, and even then, it'll likely only stun for seconds. He waved his wand. A raven flew in through the window and perched on the lectern. A beam of light shone from its eyes, projecting an image of a troll on the blackboard. Sagres pointed. Don't forget, a troll's head is tiny compared to its body. Hitting it from afar requires excellent accuracy. He continued, the conjunctivitis curse is useful, but again, you must hit the head. Expelliarmus, though, that's a poor choice. Even if you manage to disarm it, imagine a 100-pound wooden club hurtling at you. The troll probably wouldn't need to lift a finger. The students laughed again, and Sagres allowed it. Incendio and Lumos are good against forest trolls. Igniting the club and surroundings can drive them off. Binding spells require enormous magical power to completely immobilize one, because trolls are stupendously strong. After reviewing their answers, he offered a practical approach fit for their level. Given your magical reserves and number of spells mastered, area of effect attacks like the multi-shot spell make hitting a troll's head easier, and a flock of birds charm will interfere with its vision. Use those together, and you'll do well. For swamp trolls, freezing charms work best. Freeze the water's surface to restrict their movement. Drying charms can also weaken them if you can maintain them. He finished with a stern warning. 2 more points. Do not think about close quarters combat with a troll unless you are a troll yourself. And don't face one alone. Always get help unless it's absolutely unavoidable. Satisfied that they understood, he used his wand to write the spells on the blackboard. Next time, we'll go over the magical node distribution of each spell mentioned today. Everyone must master them before the practical lesson. Pages rustled as students turned to take notes. When the bell rang, Sagres had already decided to give them a vivid, practical charms class a few days before Christmas. He would gather students from both years in every house and let them face a real troll under controlled conditions. Professor Sagres, several students called as he was leaving. Yes? One of us has a younger brother in 5th year who hasn't taken his owls yet. Could he audit your class? Sagres looked surprised. When had Hogwarts students become so keen to learn? He shook his head. That's not for me to decide, Field. There's no precedent for it at Hogwarts. Disappointment showed on their faces, but Sagres softened his tone. However, you could petition Headmaster Dumbledore. Wanting to learn more isn't a bad thing. With that, he turned and left. The students immediately rallied, excitedly talking about organizing a petition and bringing as many signatures as they could to the headmaster. 10. Quidditch starts. Sagres checked the wall clock, fished his pocket watch out to be sure, shrugged into his coat, and left the office. The Quidditch House Cup was about to begin, and the students' excitement was at a fever pitch. He would be leaving Hogwarts tomorrow morning, but for now, he planned to watch the first match and then go to the headmaster's office for a routine chat with Dumbledore. The truth was, he wasn't all that interested in the game. Professor McGonagall had invited him, and he'd promised to come, but he had already decided he would leave early if necessary. He took his usual place in the professor's box and looked around. Almost everyone was there. McGonagall, Flitwick, Sprout, even Snape. Only Professor Kettleburn, care of magical creatures, was absent. Dumbledore wasn't either. Sagres guessed the headmaster was watching with a scrying mirror from his office. From his seat high in the stands, Sagres let his attention wander. It was Gryffindor against Slytherin. Madame Hooch was the referee. She'd been a professional Quidditch player in her youth. McGonagall was different. She had been a seeker for Gryffindor as a student and still had a trophy with her name on it in the trophy room, but she had never played professionally. Unnoticed by Sagres, the match had already begun. He had only been idly observing. Gryffindor had a chance, but only a chance. Slytherin's style was rough, and a few fouls had been called early. The Golden Snitch had yet to appear, and Gryffindor's seeker, Harry Potter, had not been able to do anything. The score quickly ran to 10-40, and the mood in the stands tightened. Then Harry, who had been hovering at the edge of the pitch, moved. He dove, clearly having seen the snitch. Almost all the chasers stalled. Everyone in the crowd held their breath, and for a moment the whole stadium went quiet. A sudden, ugly crash broke the stillness. Marcus, Slytherin's captain, had ridden his broom straight into Harry. The boy's small body spun wildly. By the time he wrestled control of his broom, the snitch had vanished. Gryffindor players glared at Marcus, and the crowd booed Slytherin. Madame Hooch blew her whistle and awarded Gryffindor a penalty. So far, normal, except then Harry began to behave oddly. He shook on his broom, dropped suddenly a few feet, then jerked upward again with violent stutters, as if the broom had taken on a mind of its own. Everyone noticed. Some students below suspected Marcus had damaged the broom in the collision. Sagres, with his hand in a dark pocket or handle of his wand, felt the change almost at once. Two twisting, tangled strands of magic climbed up from the field toward the stands. The sources were unmistakable: Snape down to his left, and Quirrell not far to his right. Sagres didn't break their spells at once. He wanted to see what they were up to. It was risky for Harry, yes, but so far it was contained. Even in a House Cup match, Snape would not rashly try to harm a student in front of so many witnesses. Quirrell, by contrast, had been odd since his return. After the Halloween troll incident, he'd been stranger still. He bumped into students in corridors. His chalk dust seemed to contain odd herbal fragments, and there were whispers that he muttered to himself before a mirror at night. It added up to a nagging suspicion in Sagres's mind. Sagres suspected that Dumbledore was aware of Quirrell's strangeness, but was watching to see what would happen. If Dumbledore valued someone, it would not be Quirrell himself, so something worse might be hidden behind the professor's oddities. The thought nudged him toward his old fear. Perhaps Voldemort was not dead. Perhaps the Dark Lord had returned, and Quirrell was his agent, testing Hogwarts. Still, Quirrell's behavior puzzled him. If Quirrell were acting on orders from a powerful master, he would be subtle, hiding in the shadows. Instead, he acted clumsily and drew attention to himself. Why be so obvious? Why cast spells openly at Harry in front of so many professors? Sagres's thoughts tightened until a new possibility struck him. What if Quirrell wasn't trying to harm Harry at all, but to attract attention, desperately signaling for help, like a hostage trying to be noticed? The idea crystallized. Sagres looked at the wavering boy on the pitch, then quietly withdrew his wand and flicked it through the air. "Finite incantatem," he murmured. The broom calmed. Harry stopped jerking and at once tightened his grip. He had control again. Below the professor's box, Hermione stared at her wand in surprise. The small flame she had just conjured on Snape's robe suddenly went out. A gasp ran through the stands. Hermione peered through a gap and saw Harry steady himself and spot the snitch again. Relief flooded her. She had come up to the stands because, watching through her brass binoculars, she'd seen Snape's gaze fixed on Harry while he muttered. Just like a book she'd read described a sustained dark arts charm. She'd pushed the binoculars into Ron's hands, explained breathlessly, and run up to the professor's box to raise the alarm. If Sagres hadn't countered the spell, she would have reached them in time to stop whatever Snape was doing. A confused Hermione had just slid back into her seat when Ron grabbed her and excitedly recounted what he'd seen through the binoculars. It turned out that, moments before Harry's broom steadied, right after Hermione had tried to set Snape's robes alight, a voice from the professor's box had sounded a counter-charm, and someone there had flicked a wand toward Harry. Hermione, who had only heard and only partly seen, assumed it had been Professor Greengrass who cast Finite Incantatem. She filed the detail away. She would check Finite Incantatem in the library after the match. Quirrell, whose spell had been interrupted, had hurried out of the box. Snape left quickly as well. Harry, freed from the interference, zoomed after the snitch and caught it. Gryffindor erupted in cheers. Sagres rose, smoothed his robes, and left the pitch amid the victory celebrations to make his way to Dumbledore's office. 11. Letter from a Nightingale. Dumbledore had forgotten to tell him the password. Sagres stood before the Griffin statue outside the headmaster's office on the 8th floor, fingers tapping his wand impatiently. Fizzing whizbees, the carved pattern on the stone shimmered then faded. Lemon sherbet, nothing. Cockroach clusters. Sparks spat from his wand tip as he tried one last time. Toffee. The statue's amber eyes finally rotated. Gears creaked and the passage opened. He climbed the spiral staircase, his heels striking the stone faster with every step. "Good afternoon, Sagres." Dumbledore's cheerful voice drifted from beside the fire. Sagres wasn't in the mood for chatter. "Good afternoon, Professor Dumbledore," he replied curtly. "Just come from the Quidditch pitch? How was the match?" "It was absolutely splendid, Professor." Sagres sat in an oak chair and said it without expression. "Oh, come now, Sagres. Everyone knows you don't care for Quidditch." Dumbledore removed his half-moon spectacles to polish them. "I think you misunderstand me." Sagres leaned forward. "I mean, the match between Voldemort's agent, Quirrell, and your man, Snape, was very splendid." Dumbledore's smile vanished. "That's not funny, Sagres." "I'm not joking, Headmaster." The older man's fingers stilled on the spectacles. The portraits along the wall seemed to hold their breath. "It seems you know more than I thought." Sagres disliked enigmas and sarcasm. "Compared to you, the man who knows more secrets than anyone in the wizarding world, I'm very ignorant on this matter." "Don't tease me," Dumbledore said, still mildly reproachful. "At least in some things, I don't match you." "Can the mutual flattery stop now?" Sagres cut in. Dumbledore nodded and softened his voice. "How much do you actually know about this?" "It's mostly conjecture. In this I truly know nothing," Sagres answered slowly. "Still, you're sharp. Your guess is almost right, but you have one thing wrong." Dumbledore's expression changed. "Severus has never been my minion, though I have asked him to look into Quirinus in secret." Sagres raised an eyebrow and said nothing. Dumbledore sighed, as if remembering a weight he'd carried for years. "Yes, Lord Voldemort. I never believed he was truly gone. I suspected it 10 years ago. But the whole wizarding world was rejoicing then, and I could not bring myself to tell everyone a harsher truth." He came back to the present, eyes grave. "I have spent years searching for any trace of him. Perhaps he was gravely wounded at that time. Perhaps that is why he lay dormant for so long. As for Quirrell," the headmaster shook his head, "I do not know whether he is still the man he once was. As a student, he was hypersensitive, always desperate to make a name for himself, eager for approval." His voice grew serious. "He chose the wrong path in his pursuit of power. He was seduced. Voldemort sent him to Hogwarts to retrieve something that could heal his injuries." "What is it?" Sagres asked before he could stop himself. "I cannot say, Sagres. It does not belong to me. I only keep it in trust." Dumbledore's tone was final. Another secret, Sagres thought. He let out a short laugh. "More secrets." Sagres pressed further. "Have you considered that Professor Quirrell might have been forced? His manner doesn't seem that of a competent infiltrator." "Perhaps," Dumbledore rose. "But I searched for a decade before I found any trace of him. I cannot let this chance slip by. I cannot promise I can wait another 10 years. I will do my best to bring Quirinus back if I can," he added. Sagres waved a hand. "You don't need to assure me. Professor Quirrell and I are not close. I won't alert the enemy or interfere with your plans." "Thank you, Sagres." Dumbledore smiled at last. "Would you like a sweet?" "No, thank you." Sagres stepped back. "If there is nothing else, I'll take my leave." "Wait, Sagres." He paused in the doorway, leaning on the frame. "You did well on Halloween, and today on the pitch as well. Your teaching has been very good. I believe I made the right decision." The old man's voice was calm, sincere. "You would make an excellent professor." "You flatter me," Sagres said, shaking his head. "I'll live up to whatever the position requires. As for the troll on Halloween, those were only because I promised I would act if the castle were in danger." Dumbledore popped a wriggling sugar from a jar into his mouth, wiped his hands, and added one more request softly. "Please, try not to apparate inside Hogwarts. If it's unnecessary, I won't." Sagres agreed and left the headmaster's office. A plump owl landed at his window with a soft hoo. Seeing the familiar messenger, he allowed himself a rare slight smile. He offered the bird a bag of treats, took the letter from its beak and felt the seal, a nightingale crest with a violet. The parchment smelled faintly of herbs. Sagres cast a quick anti-eavesdropping charm and opened it. The page was blank. He flicked his wand. Magic swelled in the room. "Reveal secrecy." Slow, neat handwriting bled into view. "Dear Raven, may this letter find you before the first snows reach Hogwarts. At the Oak Market, 30 miles southwest of Blackmarsh Town, I met the so-called evil wandmaker, the ballads sing about. Old Arios is as eccentric as the tales say, though far too wary to get anything useful from him. The one thing I can say is this. Like Myron Gregorovitch, Arios both owned and studied the old wand. Thunderbird's new letter says he found research manuscripts in Gregorovich's workshop bearing both their signatures. That is promising. At least it points us in the right direction. I still cannot reach Kestrel. Perhaps this must be an operation for the three of us. Enclosed is a tiny crystal vial with a few drops of Felix Felicis. If you decide to attempt to find her, take it before the operation. Kestrel once wrote that when she left her safe house in Bulgaria, she saw two dark wizards posing as gypsies. I suspect her disappearance is connected to them. Nightingale hopes for your reply before the crescent moon. From Dark Marsh, second night of frost moon. On the back, in invisible ink, a warning had been scrawled. Beware the tents east of the market. There are at least 9 wizards and 2 werewolves there. They cast the viper's venom, curse on my tent 3 times this morning. Sagres read the letter, frowning. He thought for only a few moments before deciding his next move. First I'll meet Nightingale, then we'll search for Kestrel together. At the warning about the dark wizards and the werewolves, his eyes narrowed, and a cold light passed through them. I hope they don't make any foolish choices. He removed the small crystal vial from the envelope, then conjured a blue flame at his fingertips and burned the remaining parchment and envelope to ash. 12. Smugglers and werewolves. Shadowless swiftness. Sagres' figure vanished in an instant. In the headmaster's office, the old man looked up toward Sagres' study, his face a mask of helplessness. Rotting mud gurgled under his boots as Sagres followed the scent of blood, cutting through man-eating vines to the town. Nightingale had named in her letter. Black fiend fire burned through the streets. From the soft, wet earth, he picked up an ice crystal wrapped around a werewolf fang, a signature signal Nightingale used, a magic he had custom designed for her before Azkaban. The chaos on the scene told him one thing: she had been attacked. He crushed the ice crystal without expression, drew his wand, and fired a brilliant spell into the sky. The light carried a piercing note and burst into a terrifying black crow's head high above. 2 seconds later, a purple spelllight rose 800 yards away and bloomed into an elegant nightingale pattern. Sagres exhaled, slipped into a shadow like a black crow, and shot toward her signal. The ground raced by. He passed intermittent bloodstains and 3 mangled corpses, one impaled on a tree by an ice pick, 2 half-dismembered bodies half buried in the mud, white ice crystals protruding from their fractured waists as if freezing the remains. A sluggishness in the air made him frown. An anti-apparition alchemy array had been set. They had prepared for him. At the center of the battlefield, a vast expanse of blood-sucking snake vines writhed, their grotesque heads snapping for prey. Sagres fell from the sky like a meteor. "Fiend fire of the netherworld," he called. Pale flames bloomed at his wand tip, and from them a pure white Patronus took form. It shot up, then dove headlong to the ground. Where it struck, a wave of white flame swept outward. The bloodthirsty vines turned to ash instantly. No struggle. The eerie white fire harmed nothing else. As it died away, it splintered into tiny white birds that coalesced into the shape of the Patronus and hung in the air. With the vines destroyed, the battlefield lay revealed. Ice and fire divided the ground. On the left, a bubbling swamp exhaled black flames. On the right, clusters of 3-meter ice spikes jutted up. On the dividing line, a black-robed corpse was impaled by an icicle, frozen mid-gesture, as if in the act of casting a spell. From the black fire on the left, 5 black-robed wizards stepped out. Behind them shuffled a mass of newly made inferi. Sagres ignored the grim wizards and turned to the right. Nightingale pushed herself up out of the swamp, silvery hair matted with mud, beads of congealed blood at the tips falling like sparks, the vela in her threatening to erupt. She leaned on her knees, breathing raggedly, but she was still devastatingly beautiful. The very reason these dark wizards had paid heavily to capture her, hoping to profit from her sale to a goblin. He gave a slight nod. Then, without answering the leading dark wizard who moved to parley, he raised his wand and spoke coldly and decisively. "Frenzy explosion!" A thick, blood-red bolt lanced from his wand like lightning and cut off the wizard's words. The blast demolished a large crater and sent scorched patterns radiating outward. Dozens of inferi were obliterated. Of the 5 dark wizards, 4 were blasted to dust. Only the leader remained, broken and bleeding. "Wait! In Merlin's name!" the surviving wizard cried, dropping his snapped wand and raising his shattered hands. "We were only paid dogs. Let me go. I'll serve you anything." Sagres nodded once. "You only need to do one thing." The wounded man's expression hardened. He managed to produce an intact wand with a trembling hand. "Avada," he started. Red light flashed. Sagres' silent spell, sharp as iron, swept past the wand, severing the four fingers clutching it and shattering half the man's skull. Sagres turned away with distaste and stepped toward Nightingale. "Watch out!" she warned just as Sagres helped her up. A tall werewolf lunged from the boiling mud, claws wreathed in black flame. Sagres' wand was already leveled at its landing spot. Scarlet rend! A piercing red beam lanced out, and the pouncing beast collapsed into a puddle of red liquid that splashed backward in pieces. "No!" a roar bellowed from farther off. Sagres twirled his wand. The swirling red liquid instantly crystallized into dense blood-red shards and flew toward the sound. He waved a breeze to clear the smoke and saw who had roared. "Of course," Sagres said calmly. "The infamous werewolf leader, Fenrir Greyback." Out of the dissipating smoke, a tall figure stepped forward. He had reverted to human form, but his twisted features and yellow, fang-like teeth still marked him as wolf-blooded. The blood-red crystal he'd plucked from his body, his brother's blood, was clenched in his hand. He was mud and blood-smeared, fur matted into a grotesque mess. "I know you, Sagres," Greyback rasped, hatred and disgust ragged in his voice. He glanced at Nightingale with a venom greater than anything he showed Sagres. This woman had cost them dearly, cost him his brother. "Greengrass family cub," he spat. "This ends today. I will not." "Did I say it would end?" Sagres interrupted, wand already poised. "Do you want to be marked by the Blood Moon Alliance?" he taunted. Greyback fought the change, words tearing from him through clenched teeth. "Kill me, and you'll be hunted by every werewolf." "Heh," Sagres scoffed. "Hunt me? By you? A mangy dog, infected and rabid?" The insult ignited something deep in Greyback. His spine shuddered. A feral rage built in his chest until it burst into a howl, metallic and foaming, the last shred of human reason snapping. Saliva and blood dripped from his fangs. He had willingly infected himself to gain power, become a monster who preyed on muggles and wizards alike, and now he was being sneered at. Greyback lunged, wrapped in a foul wind. Sagres flicked his wand, casting a silent, freezing charm that locked the werewolf in place like an insect sealed in amber. With casual efficiency, he plucked up swamp water with a twist of his wand and, using a homorphous charm, transformed it into a cage of razor spikes. The spikes ignited and the trapped beast was burned and shredded within. Greyback's furious howls turned to whines, humiliated and broken. Even then he whimpered, "You wouldn't dare kill me. You can't bear the Blood Moon Alliance hunting you." Sagres leaned close, pressing the wand tip against the werewolf's wildly beating heart. He spoke indifferently. "Then let your werewolf cubs try." "Magic riot," he snapped. A strange light flared at the wand tip. Fenrir screamed as the spell tore through him. In the weakening, agonized cries, he was forced back into human form. Greyback's body convulsed once, then went still. Fenrir Greyback was dead. Sagres walked up to Nightingale and tapped her with the tip of his wand. An invisible current of air swept away the mud that coated her. He supported her shoulder with one hand, and with the other, sliced open the fabric at her shoulder. Beneath it, a ghastly wound ran from her shoulder blade across her back, black, tree-like veins crawling around it. Sagres frowned, ignored her weak protests, and tore off the blood-stained cloak. "Vulnera sanentur," he intoned. A green light flared. A wisp of black smoke rose from the wound. Injuries born of the darts often needed exacting counter-curses, but Sagres was no novice at healing. He followed with another spell, Episki. White light flashed, but the wound barely responded. Nightingale let out a soft, painful groan. Sagres lifted his wand to cast again, but the girl, weak, trembling, grabbed his wrist. Under his questioning gaze, she murmured, "Safe house, tree hollow," and then went limp. Sagres watched her sleep for a second, then snapped his fingers. Invisible ripples spread through the air, and as if drawn by the motion, tiny silver-white strands of hair and specks of blood drifted in from across the town and settled into a crystal vial. He wrapped Nightingale in his arms and apparated. Moldova, Twilight Forest. They appeared with a soft pop beneath a tall oak. Nightingale made a small sound but did not wake. Sagres inclined his head to the trunk and spoke an old, obscure incantation. The bark groaned and indented, forming a door-sized hollow low to the ground. Inside, the space yawned unexpectedly wide, undetectable extension charm. He raised his chin, and a soft light bloomed within. A branch swung down and weaved itself into a wooden lounge chair. He laid Nightingale gently across it, then sealed the entrance with several layers of protective charms. He sighed and looked at her. Dealing with a girl like this was always complicated. Vila were beautiful and dangerous, masters of charm and fury. Silver-white hair, flawless skin, a faint inner glow when they slept. They also had a monstrous bird form, with a razor beak and burning wings. Vila could interbreed with humans. Their descendants sometimes carried partial traits. Nightingale, Valus Nixia by birth, was one such descendant. Her mother Vila, her father a snow demon, which left her with strange atavistic mutations. To avoid causing infatuation and chaos with her looks, she had chosen long seclusion in the Moldovan primeval woods. He helped her sit and, without hesitation, pushed his wand tip into the wound on her back. The black veins writhed and shrieked as if in pain. The pattern peeled away, slowly and inexorably, from beneath her skin. Black magic streamed toward his wand. He felt heat in his palm. When the last of it had been stripped from her, he realized some of the dark curse had seeped into his hand. Worse, the old yew wand he had used was corroded by the curse and lay useless in his grip. He felt a flash of melancholy. That wand had come from the Greengrass family attic when he was 6. It had accompanied him ever since, imperfect but constant. He set it aside. With his other hand, he stroked Nightingale's back, and without ceremony, 2 nonverbal healing spells slipped from him. The wound vanished as if it had never been. Her torn clothes mended themselves. He laid her back. She opened her eyes. "The curse is cleared," he said calmly. "No scars." Nightingale stared at his right hand, black-streaked, corroded by the curse, and said nothing. Sagres conjured a teapot and poured, steam rising. He handed her a cup. "That wasn't the work of ordinary dark wizards. What happened?" She took the cup with trembling fingers. Her voice was low and ragged. "Arios ambushed me. He stole the kraken heart you gave me." Sagres neither judged nor scolded. He simply said, "Then there are 2 people to find, Kestrel and Arios. We should find Kestrel first." He produced a thumb-sized dark blue gem from his cloak. "A kraken has 2 hearts. If Arios still carries yours, tracking him won't be hard." She nodded and set the cup down. She took his right hand, fingers brushing the black lines, and fell silent for a long minute. "Can that be healed?" she asked finally. "Of course." Sagres pulled his hand back and snapped the ruined wand in 2. "If there are no other complications, we should leave at once." He handed her 3 crystal vials, one with a lock of her silver hair, one with a tiny drop of blood, and one with a teardrop. "Keep these safe. I'll take half of whatever potion you brew." Nightingale paused, then smiled faintly. "Do you have any leads on her?" "No, but I know who does." Sagres held out his left hand. Nightingale understood and placed her fair right palm in his. At their touch, they apparated. The Balkan Peninsula. They reappeared at the edge of a little village and followed directions to a Romani fortune-teller's tent. Sagres pointed once, and a voice blasted from inside in a chain of curses. "Which damned bastard dares to cast a spell in Seraphin Somberland's tent?" A hunched old woman shuffled from the canvas, stooping on a stick. "I'll flay your skin into pages and brew my ink with your blood," she snarled. When she saw Nightingale, the ferocity died from her face, replaced by a greedy, hungry light. "Ah," she croaked, the words slick with anticipation. "Perfect material for a spell. Your hair would brew the finest love potion ever imagined." She stretched a filthy, clawed hand toward Nightingale's silver hair. Sagres cut her motion off with a nonverbal immobilis. She froze mid-reach. Stones rose silently from the earth, and under a amorphous charm, sharpened into spikes that ringed her like a prison. "Now you answer," Sagres said flatly, staring into eyes that were all malice and fear. "A month ago, outside Hoff's apothecary in Bulgaria, 2 wizards dressed as Romani set up a tent. Where are they now?" The old woman tried to speak, tried to draw her wand, but her limbs were still partly controlled. "Don't make me dig in your mind to pull the answer," Sagres said. "You won't like that." Whether it was his threat or the name he used, Seraphin Somberland's resistance broke. "Let me think. I need a crystal ball," she muttered. Sagres flicked his wrist, and 3 crystal balls of different sizes rose into the air. She seized the smallest, and the purple smoke within began to coil and change. Her cataract-clouded eyes went white with sight. "The mists will tell me where the children are. Wheel of Fortune, if you continue to turn," she intoned, half a chant, half a prayer. Images swirled and finally halted on a rundown wooden house guarded by 2 Romani. Sagres' jaw tightened. He held out his hand to Nightingale. She took it. With the pop of apparition, they were gone again. 14. Unbreakable Vow. Sagres and Nightingale apparated directly in front of the little cabin they had seen in the crystal ball. Outside, 2 dark witches paced back and forth with their wands, the same women they had just watched. Both wore necklaces strung with finger bones and charms carved from skulls. Revolting, shriveled infant corpses were lashed to their waists. They were brazenly casting spells in full view of the nearby villagers, who gaped at the spectacle. Apparently, the statute of secrecy meant nothing to them. These gypsy witches drifted across Europe without nationality or fixed residence. They were too elusive and dangerous for the International Confederation of Wizards to dispatch many resources after. They refused to be taken without violent resistance, and their repertoire of curses and dark artifacts made them lethal. They couldn't enter the cabin, though. It was a bronze feather safe house and would not admit anyone uninvited. Nightingale did not wait for Sagres to act. She raised her wand, and a surge of cold power condensed in the air. The 2 dark witches barely had time to sense a spell before a cluster of sharp, dense ice spikes erupted from the ground, impaling them like porcupines. Sagres arched an eyebrow, stepped around the frozen corpses, and knocked on the cabin door. "Knock, knock, knock!" The rotten wood creaked open, and a small, red-haired witch poked her head out. When she saw them, her face lit up. "You finally made it. I've been here almost a month." The little witch, Kestrel, darted forward to hug Sagres, but a barrier charm halted her mid-stride. She blinked in surprise, abandoned the hug, and flitted toward Nightingale, only to be met with a freezing charm that stilled her. "Ha-ha! What mischief has the little troublemaker gotten into now?" A gruff, amused voice called from behind them, accompanied by the explosive pop of apparition. They all knew the voice before they turned. Thunderbird, one of the deans from Ilvermorny. "Who are you calling a troublemaker?" "I didn't say you." "Then who did you say?" "I said, the troublemaker." "Then you're calling me that." The old and the young immediately began bickering, the familiar skirmish one expected of them. If they had not, it would have been the odd thing. The 4 gathered inside the cabin. Their purpose was simple in origin, but precise in execution. About a year earlier, when Sagres had recently joined the Bronze Feather and was hunting for a wand, Kestrel had performed a playful divination that unexpectedly produced a true prophecy. The vision promised that Sagres and Nightingale would find materials for 4 wands in a magical ruin, and Thunderbird would be the one to craft those wands. Over the last year, they had pursued that fortune and risked a great deal. Now, at the moment of harvest, Sagres wanted to make sure nothing could go wrong. "Before we act, I want everyone to understand the purpose of this journey," he said calmly, glancing at Kestrel and Thunderbird. "You all want a powerful wand, but you must have heard the story of the Elder Wand. Antioch Peveril, its first known owner, was murdered for showing off its power. Since then, the wand has been notorious, and successive owners rarely lived more than 5 years. He looked from face to face in the cramped room, his voice cold and serious. "To prevent us from inviting endless trouble, whether we succeed or fail, everyone must take an unbreakable vow. The secret of each other's wands shall not be revealed." Kestrel started to protest, but fell silent. Sagres fixed her with a look. "Not even to other members of the Bronze Feather." She swallowed and asked, timidly, "What if I blurt it out by accident?" "The spell will warn you at the critical moment," he replied, "but if you need absolute assurance, you may entrust that memory to me for safekeeping." Kestrel nodded and said nothing further. With no objections, Sagres drew a blade and cut his palm. A tiny crystal vial rested on the table and caught a bead of his blood. The others followed. Nightingale, Kestrel, and Thunderbird all made shallow cuts and added a drop to the vial. "I, Sagres Greengrass." The 3 others spoke in unison. Their names rang out. I, Valus Nixia, Balikna Wolf, Arisa Lumina. Stars as witness, bloodline as covenant. Once the secret of each other's wands is touched, the covenantor shall be silent, shall not be revealed by word, shall not be set to paper, shall not be hinted by magic. The betrayer shall die by bloodline exhaustion. The faithless shall perish by magical dissipation. This vow shall forge shackles from this moment forth, until the last vow-maker is buried in the earth, it shall stand. The instant the vow ended, the blood in the vial shimmered and stretched into fine golden threads. They rose and wound themselves around each of their index fingers, then seeped into the skin and vanished. The unbreakable vow had been made, and from that moment, its binding took hold. Sagres's expression softened a little. Before he left, he asked one last question. Kestrel, why were those two dark wizards after you? They saw my crystal ball, I think, she answered, voice small. Sagres's face went hard. Nightingale immediately snapped at the girl. We've told you more than once not to show your divination talents or tools to other wizards, especially gypsy wizards. Kestrel bowed her head, clearly intimidated by his sternness. Thunderbird, trying to lighten the mood, changed the subject and mentioned something he'd heard from Grigorovich. I managed to get hold of some research manuscripts about the old wand. Some of the techniques in them are things I never even considered. Compared with the Wolf family's traditional methods, they're completely different. Kestrel blinked. So Thunderbird and I just wait here in the safe house? Sagres nodded. Nightingale and I will go find old Arios first and retrieve his sea monster heart. Then we'll go to the place in your prophecy to look for the materials. Once we have them, we'll hand them to Thunderbird so he can make a wand. Nightingale offered what she hoped was reassurance. Don't worry, if your prophecy's right, we'll find the materials there. Thunderbird grinned. If I went with you, I'd probably just get in the way. Staying here is doing them a favor. Before he left, Sagres warned the red-haired girl again in a low voice. You must not use that crystal ball for divination for a year, unless you want your life to end right now. Oh, I know, Kestrel whispered, head bowed, hardly sounding convinced. Sagres turned to Thunderbird. Do you have a spare wand? Mine was damaged. I need something temporary. Thunderbird dug through his bag and produced several wands. They were unmistakably North American in style, beautiful, traditional Wolf family pieces, but their feel didn't match Sagres's more foreign technique. He found them awkward, but better than nothing. He tucked one into his robe. Do you still have any Felix Felicis? Sagres asked Nightingale. Give them 2 drops each, and give them some ordinary potions for emergencies. Nightingale nodded and brought out a bundle of little crystal vials from her robe, handing them to Thunderbird and Kestrel. You two won't be at the prophesied location directly, but you must stay absolutely safe. This operation has already run into too many setbacks. I don't want to hear about anyone else getting hurt. Kestrel and Thunderbird both nodded, sober. Sagres added, the prophecy says we will be obstructed at every turn. If you truly are in danger, crush this. He pressed a mottled sea monster eyeball into Thunderbird's palm. This is a portkey. It's illegal, but it will get you out of trouble. After finishing their preparations, Sagres produced a Norwegian sea monster heart and cast a spell to turn it into a temporary portkey. That portkey would take him and Nightingale to another sea monster heart. By the time they arrived, old Arios would get a surprise he wouldn't soon forget. Sagres took Nightingale's hand, nodded to the two waiting in the wooden safe house, grasped the portkey, and activated it. The spell flared, and they were gone. Portkey travel was always disorienting, like being squeezed into a bottle and forced through its neck, and when the sensation faded, they found themselves standing in a dusty, ruined magical chamber. No sooner had they materialized than a black wave of air slammed into them. Sagres raised his wand instantly. A shield charm flared and took the blow. Nightingale threw up a levitation charm, sending tables and chairs floating between them and the source of the attack to break line of sight. Confringo, a voice called, and yellow light shot from the darkness. The spells hit the floating furniture and set off a chain of explosions. Shards of splintered wood and stone flew in every direction. A strangled, quacking laugh came from behind the debris. Ha! It's you again, you greedy woman! Arios's voice slithered through the air, his location shifting constantly. Nightingale kept control of the debris and answered calmly, I am not greedy. I'm only here to retrieve what belongs to me. Oh, is that so? He said, incredulous. I have no reason to lie to you, Nightingale replied. Avada Kedavra! A dagger of green light stabbed across the chamber. Nightingale used the floating obstacles as a shield, and when the curse struck them, she flung the airborne wreckage toward the green glow. Protego! Arios threw up a shield charm to block the debris and shot back a stupefy. Don't think I don't know what you're up to. Rage twisted his voice. You all covet my techniques. You tried to steal my research. A sharp, cutting curse hissed past the edge of his scalp. Arios touched his smooth, bald head with a startled expression. Shame flitted across his face as if he had remembered something humiliating. Wretched thieves, I'll show you Arios's power. He flicked his wand, and the dusty floor pulsed. From the ground swarmed dense, writhing shapes, monstrous, humanoid, and bestial forms, every inch streaked with black, twisting veins. Arios laughed. Ha! I almost forgot. You were struck by my spell before. Something like delight warred with cruelty on his face. He had believed that the woman would be cursed and turned into one of his puppets. Seeing her still able to use magic surprised and irritated him in equal measure. Honestly, you truly surprise me, he muttered, waving his wand until black smoke poured from its tip. To still be able to use magic after my curse, only a few have such endurance in the 90-odd years I've worked this magic. Venomous plague, he hissed. The black smoke coalesced into 3 slender, poisonous snakes, which shot across the chamber with lightning speed and dove into Sagres' outstretched hand. Arios' grin widened. Ha! So someone helped you transfer the curse. He sounded almost proud. Very good. So it was you who cut off my hair, wasn't it? Sagres didn't answer. He couldn't. An indescribable pain had flared through his right hand, the one that carried the curse, and the agony stole his concentration. 16. Felker Elios Nightingale whipped up a thick mist of ice to slow the horde, then slammed a banishing charm into the fray to push the monsters back and carve out some space on the battlefield. Don't mind me. Kill him. Sagres barked through clenched teeth. He was in agony, but he steadied himself and cast mechanical mind on his own head. Blue light rippled across his face. The physical pain did not ease, but the reasoning that had been eroded by suffering returned like a switch being flipped. Chaotic explosion. The explosion ripped through the ranks, scattering the monsters, but the curse-corrupted ones had already closed in. From the shadows, Arios flinched at the sheer destructive force Sagres wielded and decided he had to get away. Sagres anticipated the move, blowing a creature in front of him to pieces with a blasting charm, then trained his wand on the old man. Pale flames leapt from the tip, and a pure white Patronus, threaded with rolling fire, surged toward Arios. The flaming spirit incinerated any monsters in its path, clearing a clean corridor between Sagres and the fleeing man. Summon Dispel, Arios spat, throwing up a dark ward to meet the Patronus. Dispel! Dispel! Old Arios fired off a succession of banishing charms and finally quelled the Patronus. He panted, wild-eyed, then turned his attention back to the monsters and sent a red, roiling curse toward them. Flesh decay! At his voice, the creatures convulsed. Their speed increased unnaturally. Black veins beneath their hides bulged and burst, spraying poisonous, curse-tainted blood. The situation tilted toward catastrophe. Sagres reacted instantly. He slapped a blocking charm to fling several charging beasts aside, followed by a cutting charm that shredded the airborne bodies. Holy light expulsion. A blade of pure white light shot from his wand, and the nearest cursed monsters disintegrated into scattered bones where it struck. Nightingale closed in on Arios at the same time, but a pack of dog-like fiends leapt at her from the flank. Quicksand trap, she called. The beasts were swallowed as the ground became a swirling vortex of sand. Bog abyss. A long, fetid swamp opened between Sagres and the remaining monsters, halting their momentum. Sagres finally had a moment to breathe. Nether fiend fire, he intoned. Arios tried to take the moment to vanish, but Nightingale was already on him. Cold air condensed into jagged ice spikes that shot toward him. The old man dove and barely avoided the worst. Using an acceleration charm in his panic, sweat slid down his smooth scalp as he whirled, cast a killing curse at Nightingale, and prepared to apparate away. Nightingale angled the ice to intercept the green light of the killing curse. Before Arios could apparate, a precise blocking charm knocked him sideways. Expelliarmus! A red bolt smacked his chest, and the wand flew from his hand. Silencio! He crashed through a corner shelf and hit the floor, unable to make a sound. Immobilize! Spectral ropes shot up and bound him tight. Stop! A freezing charm snuffed his last hope of escape. Nightingale chained spells in quick succession until Arios was completely subdued. She used Axio to lift him from the rubble, removed the silencing charm, and trained her ebony wand at his throat. Her voice was cold. Make them stop. Heh! This curse has no counter, he croaked. Make them stop, she repeated, voice like ice. Kill me, you foolish, he taunted. Filch Arios will never yield to you. Kill me with that broken stick of yours. Kill me now. Nightingale hesitated only a beat before she struck with Crucio. The old man howled, but kept jeering between spasms. Stop, Nightingale. Sagres' voice cut through the noise and brought her up short. He had finished clearing the remaining monsters and now strode over, stepping on severed limbs as pale fire crows danced at his heels, turning flesh to ash wherever they passed. He reached Arios and lightly touched the gaunt chest with his wand. The mechanical mind was not only a defensive trick. Sagres had learned to use it to modulate emotion, like tuning a machine. It was a subtler cruelty than Crucio, able to pluck and amplify hidden feelings at will. Under that touch, an inexplicable rage flared in Arios. Bluish-gray veins pulsed at his temples, and his voice became a raw, barking rage. You parasites, robbers, get out of my domain. You wretches who don't even deserve Hawthorn, do you think to steal my wand? Ha! It's fused to my bones and blood. Try to use it, and you'll spit your entrails from your nose. Did that idiot Grigorovich send you? Sagres mocked, tapping him again. Always hiding in a workshop, dreaming of beating Garrick Ollivander, and now that pig uses an old wand as a ploy and wants my research? Sagres let the emotions shift. Sudden, overwhelming sadness made the old man wail. Then he slipped into ecstatic laughter that echoed madly around the ruins. Finally, Sagres brushed the tip of his wand against Arios' temple and imposed an absolute calm. Sagres fought the pain in his arm and spoke in a clipped, cold voice. We follow the prophecy to find the wand. You are peripheral, a faint link at best. We are not interested in your tinkering. Your own greed has done this to you. He looked at the hollow, docile figure before him and added, You should not take what is not yours, and you should not use dark arts against Valus. At the last words, Sagres released an unforgivable curse. Old Arios fell fully under Imperio, trembling as his limbs obeyed. Shaky fingers reached for the dark curse that clung to Sagres' right hand. Obediently, he began to peel it away, transferring it onto himself until the ward covering Sagres was completely lifted. Sagres ended the Imperio and opened his palm. Return the Kraken heart. 17 for legendary wands. Is that so? Filch Arios muttered, distracted. You never thought of stealing my research? Nightingale answered calmly. We're only looking for materials. Someone can help us finish the wands. Who? His old temper flared. Who can match me at wand making? He began to rant. Wandcraft is ancient and profound. Only I can create anything comparable to the old masterpieces. Only I. Madness flickered across his aged face. Who did you find to make wands for you? Before they could reply, he sneered, contempt dripping from his voice. The traditional European faction, Ollivander and the like, is conservative, not innovative. If you went to them, you'd be making a huge mistake. He paced, sharpening into a monologue. That fool Grigorovich has some creativity, but his lust for fame and fortune has surpassed his regard for the wand itself. Shakoba Wolf of the North American fusion faction. His wands excel at natural elemental magic, but they're too limited. The Adebayo family in West Africa is brilliant at combining magic with alchemy, but they lean so heavily on nature, they forget the essence of true magic. Only I am the greatest wand maker in the world. With a trembling hand, he pushed aside his robe and drew several wands of different shapes from a swaying leather pouch at his waist. You wanted wands? I'll show you real legendary creations. He handled each reverently as he explained. The first is ancient cypress. Its core is a thunderbird tail feather, and the amber set in the head contains the remains of ancient insects. Against natural magic, it outperforms anything else. It only needs one last step, injecting the user's blood into its core channel to complete it. He held up a second, its body carved like a spine. This is you that heals itself, carved into a spine shape. Its universal core is the heart tendon of a mountain tyrannosaur. It must be steeped in mooncalf blood for a year to be finished, but even as a semi-finished piece, its defensive charms are already extraordinary. The third is a very rare twin cherrywood wand, he said, eyes bright. It requires the fetal hair of two unicorn foals, twins, that died in difficult birth as its core. Absolutely rare. Its offensive power would reshape the world. I tried countless combinations. This is the most perfect. He hesitated, then added, it lacked one last element, a kraken heart, but now it's complete. With just a drop of the user's tears, it would be ready to wield. Finally, he drew another from velvet. Arios's voice grew soft and reverent. This one, immortal flowerwood for the body. The core is threefold: a thestral tail feather taken from one killed by an unforgivable curse, hair from a yeti driven mad by the Cruciatus, and the spinal cord of an Akami whose will was shattered by Imperius. The three intertwine into a core of infinite potential. The spiral thorn patterns around the shaft can store residual magic from multiple casts. The stronger the user, the stronger the spells. It adapts to every kind of magic. It is my crowning achievement. But what it lacks, Arios went on, pride curdling into bitterness, is a master who can truly control it. His face fell. No one can control it, at least not yet. He looked at the two young wizards before him and said something that surprised them both. If you can control it perfectly, I'll hand over everything I've accomplished. Sagres picked up the translucent immortal flowerwood wand and felt its strangeness immediately. He idly cast a few small spells and was secretly taken aback by the power humming through it. Nightingale watched him and asked the old man, "What do you mean by perfect control?" Arios's eyes went blank, then he laughed, a hollow, cracked sound. "Ha, someone already has." A lonely expression crossed his face. An ordinary wizard would go mad the moment they took that wand. It amplifies the desires in your heart until you can't even manage a simple enchantment. "Heh, yes, absurd," Arios muttered on. "I made a wand I myself cannot use." Black veins had crept up his throat. His body was ravaged by a consuming curse. He fumbled for a crystal feel and with shaking hands collected a single turbid tear. He offered it to them. "Take it, all my skills and research. Take them." Sagres and Nightingale regarded him without sudden movement. "Please," Arios pleaded, "help me, even if it's only to find someone, so my work can be passed on." Sagres finally nodded and reached for the tiny bottle. "It is remarkable work. It should not be lost in this ruin." "Ha, is that so?" Pain contorted Arios's face. The black veins were spreading. He forced himself up and pointed weakly at the immortal flowerwood wand in Sagres' hand. "Just one last thing. Kill me with that wand, with that beautiful white flame." Sagres said nothing. The old man pressed on, voice raw. "I have lived 131 years. Countless people have died under my wand. That cannot be denied. I am a scoundrel. But for the sake of these wands, please grant me this small mercy." At last, Sagres raised the wand and aimed it at the old man's chest. A white flame flared from the tip and wrapped him completely. With a single silent motion of the wand, a small pit opened in the stone. Nightingale scattered the old man's ashes and the wand he had been using into the pit and covered them. Sagres summoned a flagstone to serve as a tombstone. Nightingale traced letters into the stone with a small, sharp charm and read aloud as she wrote, "Here lies a wicked man, the end of a legendary wandmaker. Let those who come after heed this warning. Do not take Filk Arios's bone and blood wands out of greed, or you will invite terrible retribution." When she finished, she stood and met Sagres' eyes. "So, have we achieved our goal?" "I think so." Sagres scanned the surroundings. He had realized long before that this place matched the prophecy. Behind the hidden northern door lay the true purpose of their journey: rare materials for wand making, though now they seemed unnecessary. He sheathed the immortal flowerwood wand with a careful hand and handed the twin cherrywood wand to Nightingale. The other two incomplete wands were left reserved for their rightful owners. Their business here was done. It was time to return to Hogwarts. 18. Christmas Eve. Before leaving, Sagres and Nightingale explored the ruins briefly. The place was clearly ancient. Nightingale's long boots crunched across lichen-mottled flagstones, and the glow from her wand tip startled a flock of sleeping bronze feather beetles. As those thumb-sized magical insects beat their wings, they traced faint green trails in the damp air like meteors streaking across the night sky. The architecture suggests it dates back to the Tudor period, Sagres observed. Nightingale ran a gloved hand over a bas-relief on the stone door, where vine-like golden fern fronds curled out of carved eye sockets. It was originally a magic plant cultivation area. Arios barely touched these 13th-century specimens when he renovated it. Sagres used his everlasting flowerwood wand to lift a dark red plant hanging from the archway, carefully avoiding its thorny tendrils. Collect what you need, leave the rest here, and I'll leave a permanent port key so you can come back anytime. Nightingale nodded. Her glass potion bottle hovered at her side, a yew-wood spoon set into its cork automatically scooping up rare finds. The ruin, preserved since the Tudor era, held many uncommon species. They even found 2 plants the ministry listed as functionally extinct. Nightingale, a young potion master, had been invited to join Bronze Feather not for prowess in dueling, but for her skill at brewing more than 10 difficult potions, a fact that pleased her greatly. "I'll return directly to Hogwarts," Sagres said, handing her 2 unfinished wands. "Except for Bronze Feather assignments, I probably won't be leaving again." Nightingale accepted the wands and hesitated for a moment. "Sagres? What is it? Next July, I'll be taking up a professorship at Beauxbatons. What will Madame Maxime have you teach? Potions." "That suits you," Sagres said seriously. "But I have a suggestion." "What suggestion?" "Wear a veil. Otherwise, your students might not learn anything." "I'll seriously consider it." Nightingale laughed, and the glow-in-the-dark ferns along the ceiling of the ruins flickered in unison, as if winking. "Cast frost magic at least 3 times a week. It will help suppress the Vila blood in your family line." Sagres tapped the dragonhide pouch at her waist with his wand. "And remember to remind pupils about any unfinished steps when you hand over the wands." He plucked a glowing rose from the archway. Its petals solidified the moment they touched his wand and transformed into a perpetually fresh brooch. "This is a portkey," he added. "How can you casually give a lady a rose?" Nightingale teased, a sly smile on her lips. "You've gotten far too gentle lately, Mr. Greengrass." "Indeed, perhaps I've been charmed by you. I suspect I accidentally mixed amortentia into the Felix Felicis I gave you," she said with a wink. "That would have been a bit redundant." "Veritaserum would have sufficed," Sagres replied with a mock frown. Nightingale laughed, tucked away her potion bottle, and waved decisively. "Farewell, Sagres." Her words were cut off as she vanished in a flash of silver light. Sagres smiled and apparated back toward Hogsmeade. He recalled Dumbledore's admonition that apparating directly into someone's home was impolite, no different than kicking in the front door. If Hogwarts was, in the headmaster's eyes, another kind of home, it would be rude to apparat straight into the castle. Better to arrive somewhere nearby. Christmas was approaching, and Hogsmeade was blanketed in a thick layer of snow. The edges of the lake were frozen. Sagres ran into 2 unexpected occupants of the village, the Weasley twins. As he walked down the street, Fred and George were just squeezing out of Honeydukes, looking sheepish when they realized they'd bumped into a professor. "If I'm not mistaken, today isn't a Hogsmeade weekend," Sagres observed calmly. "So, gentlemen, who's going to tell me why you're here?" Fred adopted a tone of mock innocence. "Professor, it's a misunderstanding." George chimed in. "Yeah, who would risk breaking school rules to come to Hogsmeade?" "Even if someone would," Fred said, "it certainly wouldn't be a Weasley." "Even if it were a Weasley," George added, "it wouldn't be the 2 of us." Sagres raised a hand to silence their nonsense. "What a coincidence. I happen to know the way back to Hogwarts." The twins wilted but had no choice. They followed Sagres toward the castle. "Don't look so glum," he said over his shoulder without turning. "Come back with me now and it won't cost you points. Or you can stay in Hogsmeade and I'll take 5 points from each of you." "Thank you, Professor, but I think it's better if we go back," Fred said quickly. "Fred's right," George agreed. "But Professor, why are you in Hogsmeade?" "If I were you," Sagres replied with a faint smile, "I'd keep quiet." They understood and fell silent. Sagres led them through the wind and snow toward Hogwarts. By mid-December, the weather had turned bitter, but the owls were unusually busy as younger students sent letters home asking about staying at school for the holidays. In potions, Malfoy and his cronies were causing trouble as always. I find it regrettable, Malfoy said slowly, with a deliberately cutting tone as he squinted at Harry, that those who have to stay at school for Christmas are all homeless. Crabbe and Goyle snickered, egging him on. Harry, however, focused on weighing lionfish bone powder and ignored the taunts. Since the last Quidditch match, Malfoy had nursed a grudge against Harry for stealing the spotlight on the pitch. Jealousy and spite twisted his words. Still, the news that students could stay at Hogwarts over Christmas had filled Harry with joy. He wouldn't have to go back to Uncle Vernon's bullying, nor face Dudley's hateful sneer. The thought of spending Christmas at Hogwarts warmed him from the inside and made Malfoy's barbs far easier to bear. 19. Storm Harry tried to focus on the task at hand, keeping busy so he wouldn't have to notice Malfoy's presence. No matter how much Malfoy provoked him, he wouldn't let Christmas be ruined. He was genuinely glad to be staying at Hogwarts for the holiday. Ron's parents were visiting Charlie in Romania, and since the Weasley brothers, who were still at school, had nowhere else to go, they were staying at Hogwarts too. After potions, they came up from the dungeons only to find the entrance to the Great Hall blocked by a massive fir tree. Hermione, quick-eyed, noticed a pair of huge boots peeking out from beneath the branches and called out cheerfully, "Hello, Hagrid." "Hello, Miss Granger. Christmas is coming soon. Are you staying at Hogwarts as well?" Hagrid replied. Hermione shook her head. "I'm taking the Hogwarts Express home tomorrow to spend Christmas with my parents." Ron poked his head through the branches. "Hello, Hagrid. Need a hand?" "Oh, no, Professor Greengrass has already helped me with most of it, but thanks, Ron," Hagrid said gratefully. At that moment, Malfoy sneered in his usual arrogant tone. "Could you not block the way? Weasley, want to earn some pocket money? The gamekeeper's hut is a palace compared to your house." That was all it took. Ron, who already despised Malfoy, leapt forward. "Weasley!" Snape's cold voice cut through from behind them. Ron let go of Malfoy's collar, but stood there panting, furious. "Professor Snape, he was provoking me," Hagrid said, setting the fear down and shaking snow and needles from his hair. Malfoy was insulting Ron's family. "Fighting is against school rules," Snape said, sweeping his hollow-eyed gaze over them. 5 points from Gryffindor. You should consider yourselves fortunate. I'm not deducting more. This isn't the first time." He shot Harry, Ron, and Hermione a warning look. "Now all of you, move along." Malfoy, Crabbe, and Goyle pushed through the branches with triumphant smirks, scattering needles across the floor and leaving Harry, Ron, and Hermione fuming. "Just you wait. I'll deal with them sooner or later," Ron muttered, watching their backs. "Wait a moment," a calm voice called from inside the Great Hall, halting Malfoy and his cronies. "If the three of you can't restore this fort to its original condition, you will have to go into the Forbidden Forest and cut down a new one yourselves." "It's Professor Greengrass," Hermione exclaimed. She squeezed past Harry and Ron to the front and saw the professor intercepting Malfoy, Crabbe, and Goyle. Harry and Ron exchanged glances, grins spreading across their faces. "I don't understand," Malfoy began. "This year, I'm in charge of decorating the Great Hall and the Christmas trees," Professor Greengrass said calmly. "Strictly speaking, this fire belongs to me. That is not a reason to destroy it." He planted himself in the middle of the entrance so that even Snape, standing at the bottom of the steps, was blocked. "Either you go into the Forbidden Forest and cut down a new one for me, or each of you will lose 5 points, Greengrass continued. Snape's lips curled with a hint of sarcasm. With a disdainful flick of his wand, the broken branches and scattered needles were restored to the tree. "It's only a few leaves, Greengrass. Slytherin will not lose points over this." "It seems protecting the students of your own house has become instinctive, Professor Snape," Greengrass replied without a flicker of agitation. Then, turning to Malfoy, he said, "Mr. Malfoy, you will lose 5 points for insulting another student." He ignored Snape's dark look, waved his wand at the obstructing fur, and gently floated it into the Great Hall. "That was satisfying," Ron said, laughing. "Shame he didn't lose more points." "Look at their faces," Harry murmured. "They're not happy." "By the way, Hagrid," Hermione asked as the Slytherin trio retreated, "can you tell us who Nicholas Flamel is?" Forget it, Hagrid snapped, unusually agitated. What that dog is guarding has nothing to do with you lot. We just want to know who Nicholas Flamel is, unless you can tell us, Ron pressed. That'd save us a bit of trouble. Nothing better to do right now, Harry added, trying to coax Hagrid into speaking. No, I won't tell you. Don't even think about it. Hagrid's refusal was absolute. All right then, we'll find out for ourselves. Hermione, Harry, and Ron exchanged a conspiratorial smile and hurried off toward the library, leaving Hagrid watching them go with a troubled expression. What's the matter, Hagrid? Professor Greengrass asked, passing by and continuing to wave his wand over the Christmas tree. Ah, nothing, Professor, Hagrid answered quickly, watching Greengrass at work with a touch of envy and suddenly forgetting his earlier annoyance. More than a dozen tall Christmas trees had been placed down the center of the Great Hall, each decorated in its own style, icicles on one, candles on another, magical crackers on a third, small gift boxes on several. Hagrid reached up and took down a tiny gift box. Inside was a new pair of dragonhide gloves. He beamed, then frowned when he realized they were too small for his huge hands. It's a shame, Hagrid muttered, holding the gloves. Maybe these are for the younger wizards. Professor Greengrass happened to pass, and with a casual tap from his wand, enlarged the gloves so they fit Hagrid perfectly. Hagrid slipped them on and grinned like a child. Thank you so much, Professor Greengrass. This is the best Christmas present I've ever had. It was nothing, Greengrass said with a small smile. After finishing the decorations, Professor Greengrass lingered in the hall rather than returning to his office. With Christmas approaching, he had many letters to send, even if he thought most of them unnecessary. It seemed the professors at Hogwarts never left the castle for Christmas. Students who remained still needed supervision, and faculty retained their authority over the holidays. Idle young witches and wizards brimmed with energy. Left unattended during festive times, the school could be thrown into chaos in a single night. So the corridors were never left unpatrolled. Professors, ghosts, and Filch with his cat kept watch. Since Christmas was the next day, the students were unusually well behaved today. Sagres had finished mailing the last parcels and letters and idled in the Hogwarts library until morning. The next day, the castle hummed with holiday cheer. He took breakfast in the Great Hall and then returned to his office. As expected, a small pile of letters and parcels lay by the window. He picked up a dark blue parchment envelope set with a wax seal, a kestrel totem, wings spread, its edges dusted with golden powder. Kestrel, then. He raised an eyebrow and opened it. Dear Mr. Raven, first, I must thank you for the item you had Nightingale deliver to us, though I am not at all satisfied. I must state that the peculiar wand truly left me astonished. If there were an award for most horrifying wand design of the year, it would definitely be in the top 3. But Mr. Raven, did it not occur to you that, as a young lady, carrying such a wand would look strange? Do you see me as some terrifying old wizard? Or perhaps your user experience awareness is worse than a troll wearing ballet slippers? Of course, I, Aresha Lumina, am not as careless as you. This return gift was carefully chosen by me, and I guarantee your satisfaction. Lastly, please allow me, as a professional diviner, to offer you some free advice. Next time you give a gift, consult the Goblin Fashion Yearbook more than the illustrations in Secrets of Advanced Dark Arts. Sincerely, Kestrel. On the most chaotic night of the winter star trails, a small box was enclosed. Sagres unwrapped it and found a Muggle book, Selected English Jokes. He pursed his lips. He had expected Kestrel to be displeased with the wand's design, but the letter's tone was more withering than he'd anticipated. He flipped through the joke book, old and stale, and put it aside. Next came a letter from Thunderbird with a book on North American wand cores and casings. He skimmed it. The contents were familiar. 2 other members of the Bronze Feather sent holiday wishes and asked if he would accept commissions. He declined them without hesitation. Several of his former Ilvermorny students had written notes, affectionate, full of the usual updates and complaints about their new teacher. He read them with a faint smile. The last envelope gave off a familiar scent. Nightingale. He opened it. Dear Mr. Raven, as the morning mist still curled deep within the Pyrenees, your emotional spell analysis chart appeared on my desk. The casting nodes are dissected very clearly, and I expect to master this magic soon. It will be a great help for my upcoming teaching. Thank you. When Loctis delivered the letter to me, I noticed he spoke much less than before. Perhaps I am imagining it. Enclosed in the amethyst bottle is my newly concocted perfume potion, Deep Blue Song. I prepared this Christmas gift after learning of Bose-Baton's potion class traditions. I hope you like it. Note, if you look closely, you'll also find a gnome barrel goblin trapped inside the bottle who secretly drank the perfume. He insists he was the muse for Deep Blue Song. I had no choice but to send him along. May starlight guide your research. Your follower Nightingale, on Christmas Eve, Sagres opened the bottle and peered at the little goblin curled inside. It recoiled to the bottom and refused to come out. He smiled, replaced the stopper, and set it on his desk. The Great Hall's Christmas feast was a spectacle. Roast turkey, sausages, buttered peas, mountains of potatoes. Laughter and warmth filled the long tables. Professor Flitwick had Dumbledore laughing. A tipsy Hagrid planted a sloppy kiss on McGonagall's cheek, and she, uncharacteristically, chuckled, her hat slightly askew. Sagres left after the meal and walked toward the library, catching sight of the Weasley twins and Harry engaged in a furious snowball fight in the corridor. Snowballs whistled past him. "Sorry, Professor," one of the twins called, as a pair of snowballs zipped close. The group, soaked and bright-faced, continued their play until they headed toward the common room. Sagres watched them for a moment, an involuntary smile on his face, then resumed toward his office. Filch, flanked by Madame Norris, suddenly lunged from a doorway and grabbed at the twins' sweaters and Harry's arm, hauling them roughly. "There's water all over the corridor," he barked. "I'll be turning you lot in." "Is there a problem?" Sagres asked, cool. Filch glared. "Professor, look, this corridor's flooded. They did it." "These are not violations of school rules," Sagres interrupted. He did not much like Filch. The squib had been a thorn in his side since he'd been a student. Still, the man did not deserve a public scolding. Sagres stepped forward, tapped each of the students with his wand, and their sodden clothes dried at once. A casual wave sent them on their way. They left with grateful smiles. Filch, indignant, glowered after them. Sagres turned on his heel and walked back to his office, his thoughts brushing past memories of Filch colluding with Snape to catch students after curfew. If Peeves was involved, points lost and detentions followed almost as a rule. Once inside, he cleared his desk and picked up a fresh sheet of parchment. He wrote to Snowy Owl, requesting troll specimens for a post-Christmas lesson in charm theory and practice. "I require 3 troll subspecies for demonstration. 1. Alpine rock troll, intact horns required, for attack pattern demonstration. 2. Rhine River mud troll, preferably with aquatic barnacles, for analysis of water-based mutations. 3. Black forest moss troll. Please ensure the glowing fungal moss on its back is undamaged. Enclosed are 3 undetectable extension crystal vials, each containing a static opal enchanted with a powerful shrinking spell. When a troll enters a 10-yard radius and the word subdue is spoken, the opal will compress it to doll size. While compressed, the troll will fall into a dreamless sleep. All biological activities will be temporarily static. Conditions. 1. Specimens are for academic demonstration only and will be returned in the same manner afterward. 2. As thanks, I enclose a phoenix feather quill found in Nocturne Alley. The shaft is engraved to the craftiest cargo escort. If this is the one you lost last year, I hope it makes up for the trouble. Your friend, Raven. He slid the parchment and the 3 crystal vials into an envelope, sealed it with a raven-shaped wax seal, and summoned Loctis. After feeding the messenger Raven a generous handful of mithril, he entrusted the letter to him. He watched Loctis take to the air, black wings beating a steady rhythm, and allowed himself a small private amusement at the thought of the students' faces when they returned after Christmas and found the surprises he had arranged. It would be a perfect way to test how well they had learned.